his whole family. The Padma Purana defines the term Brahmana Brahva, pseudo-Brahmana, the Brahmana who after undergoing purification by the tenfold samskara does not perform either the eternal, nitya, or adventitious, nimitika, functions is called a Brahmana Brahva. That twice-born person who having undergone niyama, brata and all the samskaras does not yet perform any of the duties enjoined by the Vedas is a Brahmana, Brahva, pseudo-Brahmana. If a person, who has obtained purification, samskara, and the sacrificial thread, neglects the regular performance of duties that are enjoined and does not study the Vedas, he is to be considered a Brahmana Brahva, pseudo-Brahmana. He who does not himself study the highest Veda Shastras nor teaches them to disciples, although such a person may happen to possess the tenfold samskara, purification, is nevertheless a Brahmana Brahva, pseudo-Brahmana. This is confirmed by Kaluka Bhatta in his remarks on Manu 785. The person born of a Brahmana family who, although devoid of the performance of the duties proper for a Brahmana, passes himself off as a Brahmana, is designated by the term Brahmana Brahva, pseudo-Brahmana, etc., etc. The position is thus summed up in a shloka of the Srimad Bhagavatam 7:11-35. By those signs that have been enumerated, which indicate the respective varnas of men, the varna of a person is to be settled. This is corroborated by Mahabharata, Santi Parva, 189-8. The varna institution as found in the scriptures is an individualistic classification of man according to disposition. The necessity for such institution is thus stated. Divine Vishnu is worshipped by a person who practices the functions, dharma, enjoined by the institutions of varna and asrama. There is no other way of pleasing him than by such activities as are enjoined by the institutions of Varna and Asrama. In the Satya Yuga there was only one Varna. The division into 4 Varnas was made in the Treta age. In the Kali age cannibals, Rakshasas, are born in the Brahmana families for troubling those whose tenfold purification, samskara, pursuit of Vedic studies, etc., have lost their vitality. Accordingly, as in the Kali age, Brahmanas by seminal birth do not possess any purity and are like the Sudras. They are not purified by following the Vedic path. They are purified by the Pancharadrik method alone. Because just as by some particular chemical process the bell metal is transformed into gold, in the same way by the Sattvada Tantric Diksha, elaborated spiritual initiation, everyone is enabled to acquire the nature of a Vipra. The words of Digdarsini, quoted by Sri Sanatana Goswami, declare that the status of a twice-born belongs to all men after initiation. Initiation, Diksha, is of 2 kinds, viz. 1. Vedic, and 2. In conformity with the Vedas. Of these the second is again of 2 kinds, viz. 1. Puranic, or 2. Pancharatric. The difference between them consists in this, that the Vedic Diksha is the initiation of the duly purified twice-born considered as a fit person for receiving spiritual enlightenment. The Puranic Diksha is initiation of an unfit person on the assumption of fitness. The Pancharatric Diksha is the initiation of an unfit person with the object of ensuring his fitness. Of these the Vedic initiation is ruled out as inadmissible in the Kali age. Sri Haribhakti-Vilas gives the preference to the Pancharatric, Tantric Diksha over the Puranic. The Diksha of Sudras formulated by the Smtartas, who belong to the creed of the Panchosakas and who favor exclusively the principle of seminal descent, is not entitled to be called Diksha in any sense. At the time of Sri Chaitanya the Pancharatric Diksha alone was in use as the Panchapasaka, i.e., atheistic. Smartas had not been able to obtain such a great influence over society by that period as they have now. The subsequent disuse of the Pancharatric Diksha by the so-called Vaishnavacharyas of a later day who were under the thumb of the Smartas will be described in due course. Diksha is so called by savants well versed in the knowledge of the divinity because it confers the spiritual knowledge, i.e., the knowledge of one's relationship with Godhead, and destroys sinfulness with its root cause. The Upanyana corresponds to matriculation or admission into the path of the true knowledge. The Diksha corresponds to graduation, i.e., the actual attainment of the enlightened state, or, according to the Pancharatric method, its actual attainment in the future if the conditions enjoined by the process are fulfilled. One becomes a Brahmana on the attainment of such knowledge. It is this spiritual status that is referred to in such passages as in Brihad 3:9-10, Gargi, he who having known the divine truth thereafter leaves this world is alone a Brahmana, and Brihad 4:421, the intelligent Brahmana having learnt about the Brahman from the scriptures will endeavor to cultivate love for him. Thereupon he is called Vaishnava, as being related to Vishnu. The The Vaishnava is thus higher than all the Varnas. The condition of the Brahmana is included in and surpassed by that of the Vaishnava. Brita Brahmanata, the status of the Brahmana by disposition, is the condition precedent to the attainment of the higher status of the Vaishnava or servant of Vishnu, in accordance with the teaching of the scriptures. The status of a Brahmana resting on seminal birth alone is nowhere mentioned in the scriptures. One of the very first steps that is required for the re-establishment of the spiritual Deva Varnasrama institution is to make Brita Brahmanata the legal institution in order to ensure its practical recognition as the genuine scriptural institution by all communities and the re-establishment of this proper gradation in the Vaishnava communities, Sampradayas. The form of Brita Brahmanata is prevalent in the Ramanandi community. It is the basis of the arrangement laid down in the Satkriya Suradipika. The Brahmo movement, which at one time applied itself to the reform of religion in Bengal, has now become almost a purely social movement and has cut itself completely away from the revealed scriptures. Its founder Ra Ramohan Roy became latterly inclined towards mundane facilities. It is such worldly considerations that also lie at the root of the subsequent split in the Brahmo community. The intellectual vigor which at one time distinguished the community has practically left it and gone over to the theosophists who are careful not to commit themselves in spiritual matters to anything definite. The position of the theosophists is the intellectual counterpart of the social ideal of the Brahmas to which the latter attach supreme importance. The Brahmas want to do away with caste as it stands in the way of mundane facilities. But organized society is in every sense better than indiscriminate individualism. The Brahmo program offers only the individualistic in place of the communal. All mundane systems have their special defect. No real progress towards the spiritual state is possible by the adoption of such a course. What is needed is not to ignore the spiritual and substitute in its place the material and worldly, but to acknowledge the spiritual and try sincerely to follow its lead in arranging our temporary affairs of this world. The one method of attaining to the spiritual is by listening to the history of Godhead who frequently comes down into this world in order, by his activities made visible to this world, to afford the bound jivas the opportunity of having the transcendental in the very midst of the mundane. Such history is necessarily unintelligible to the bound jiva and, therefore, it has to be listened to from the lips of sadhus who can alone understand and properly expound it. By listening constantly to the narrative of the transcendental pastimes of the divinity recorded in the scriptures from the lips of sadhus who themselves live the spiritual life, bound jivas are enabled gradually to attain to the consciousness of their real spiritual nature. In the next chapter we intend accordingly to present the reader with a brief explanatory account of the descents, avatars, of Godhead. After one's spiritual nature is freed from the delusions of this material world, he is in a position to understand what the service of Godhead really means. The life of Sri Krishna Chaitanya, who is the living embodiment of the very highest form of service, cannot be really intelligible to bound jivas unless they are prepared to undergo spiritual novitiate at the feet of real devotees in the manner prescribed by the word of Godhead and exemplified in all its stages, from its first beginning to the highest development, in the life of Sri Krishna Chaitanya. This is the truth of the life of Sri Chaitanya. It is indispensable to the bound jiva to be properly acquainted with it if he is disposed to attain to and continue in the state of the pure service of Godhead. The one thing needful for us all is, therefore, to listen to the divine history from the lips of sadhus, to chant the same and to act in strict conformity with its teaching after the manner taught by and exemplified in the life of Sri Krishna Chaitanya. History of divine descents, avatars. This term avatara means coming down of the divinity, whose nature is purely spiritual, into this material world, retaining fully his own transcendental nature. Therefore, the English word incarnation, which means putting on of the material coil, is wholly inapplicable to the process. When Godhead actually chooses to come down into this world, he appears to the view of bound jivas as an animate being possessed of a physical body not essentially different from that of other bound jivas. But Godhead, although he appears to them to belong to this world, does not really belong to this world at all. The deluding energy of Godhead, who is instrumental in the creation of this world of limitations as the dwelling place of individual souls that are averse to Godhead and who stunts their vision, has no power over Godhead himself. Godhead is the Lord of the deluding energy who is different from his spiritual power. The deluding energy herself is subordinate to God's own spiritual power. The the form and everything pertaining to the personality of Godhead, belong eternally to the category of the Spirit and are located above and beyond the jurisdiction of his illusory power. But in spite of the existence of eternal demarcation between him and the realm of his deluding power, Godhead chooses to come down occasionally into the realm of physical nature in the plenitude of his spiritual power with all his eternal paraphernalia and becomes actually visible to bound jivas in whose sight he seems to appear not as spirit, because the spiritual essence transcends their power of vision, but in the likeness of a mundane phenomenon. The eternal servitors of Godhead who also appear in this world in his company may alone have the sight of him and his activities as they really are. These manifestations of the Absolute, as absolute, in the domain of this relative existence, are designated by the term avatara. In the Gita, Sri Krishna says to Arjuna that he comes down repeatedly into this world and in this respect resembles the bound jiva who is caught in the cycle of physical birth and rebirth. But there is a very great difference between the two processes. Sri Krishna is the Lord of all, has no physical birth, and as regards his proper nature he is absolutely unchangeable. He appears in this world through the medium of his spiritual power. But the jivas are born in this world being endowed with physical bodies for the purpose by the power of the deluding energy, Maya Sakti, as the result of their active aversion to Godhead. The appearance of Godhead in this world in various forms, such as those of gods, reptiles, etc., is brought about by his own will. When he chooses to come down into this world, his pure spiritual body does not become enveloped in a double encasement of matter in the gross and subtle forms as in the case of the bound jiva. Godhead is simply pleased to make manifest in this world his own eternal spiritual body that exists eternally in the absolute realm of Vaikuntha. If this appears incomprehensible to the limited reason of the bound jiva, it is so for the reason that the power of the divinity is inconceivable and above all controversy. Therefore, the real nature of the activities of Godhead are not at all ascertainable by the reason of the jiva. What the jiva can understand, if he chooses not to be perversely inclined, is that Godhead, who is possessed of inconceivable power, never becomes subject to the laws of physical nature. The deluding power by which the bound jiva is controlled is also divine. But the divine power that belongs to Godhead is nevertheless always spiritual and is categorically different from material energy. The power of Godhead is one. As spiritual power alone she is eligible to directly serve Godhead. As material energy she has no access to the presence of her Lord. The material energy is subordinate to the spiritual power, as shadow is subordinate to substance or as darkness to light. It is the function of the non-substantial deluding material energy to provide souls that are averse to Godhead with a shadowy world for their deluded existence. The only law that governs the descent, avatara, of Godhead into this world is the divine will. Godhead appears in this world when he wills. He chooses to appear in this world whenever there is any unbearable decline of religion leading to the prevalence of irreligion. The laws that govern the course of this material world, as they proceed from the will of Godhead, are irresistible. But in course of time, when for some undefinable reason those laws suffer a change for the worse due to defect bred by time, irreligion waxes strong. No one except Godhead himself is able to set right those defects. Therefore, appearing in this world with his spiritual paraphernalia, the Supreme Lord puts down all such abnormal deterioration in religion. Godhead manifests himself in a twofold way. The creation of the spiritual and non-spiritual worlds and the regulation of them by inviolable laws is one of these. The activities of Godhead, as distinct from his creations in these created worlds, constitute the second kind of his manifestations. Individual souls, jivas, are associates of the activities of Godhead. The successive manifestations of Godhead that appear to the view of the jiva in the material world correspond respectively to those states that he happens to be in as the result of his meddling with matter, such activity itself being due to his falling away from his own proper spiritual nature by the prevalence of his desire for selfish enjoyment. His infinite kindness towards the fallen soul is the only cause of the manifestations of Godhead in this world. These manifestations are called divine descents, avataras. From the stage that is anterior to the appearance of the spine in organisms to the appearance of the fully developed man, several great rishis have recorded their observation of 8 successive descents of the divinity. Others have noticed 18, and a third group have observed 24 divine avataras. The well-known view of the 10 avataras is the one that is held by most rishis who were versed in divine science. Those rishis postulate 10 particular states through which the soul passes successively from the beginning to the end of each stage of his bondage. These are indicated by 1. Absence of the spinal column, 2. Appearance of the circular spine, 3. The elongated spine, 4. The vertical spine or the man-animal state, 5. The man of dwarfish stature, 6. Man in the savage state, 7. Civilized men, 8. Intellectual men, 9. Ultra-intellectual state, and 10. Complete destruction of the unspiritual state. In accordance with these successively appearing historical states in the evolution of the bound state of the jiva, the 10 avatars, viz. Fish, tortoise, boar, man, lion, dwarf, Parasurama, Rama, Balarama, Buddha and Kalki are observed as the corresponding forms of the divine appearance. The narrative of their supernatural activities is recorded in the Puranas and specially in Srimad Bhagavatam. Those specialists of the science of devotion, who have understood the nature of these divine manifestations by means of intensive concentrated investigation, have, by the grace of Sri Krishna Chaitanya, been enabled to realize the truth regarding Krishna and specially the unique exquisiteness of his Braha pastimes. Of all the pastimes of Krishna, his human activities are the highest, and his proper nature and his proper form is the human. The descent of divine spiritual power into the realm of the material energy, or, in other words, the manifestation of Godhead's unspiritual power in the apparent form of the manifestation of material energy, is known as divine descent, avatara. By means of such descent, the association of the novice on the path of spiritual life in this world with the realm of the spirit is effected, and such association is the only way by which the person practicing spiritual endeavor, sadhaka, is enabled to attain spiritual realization. It will be observed that the account of the 10 avatars that correspond to the respective stages of the human mind in the course of the development of its spiritual consciousness has been explained by means of terms that have recently been employed in the domain of physical science in connection with the evolution of the human physique from the first beginning of animal life in the ENG. From this apparent analogy, the modern reader may scent, in the explanation recorded in the scriptures, an unacknowledged and crude misapplication, to an irrelevant subject, of the truly scientific theory of the evolution of the physical form of animal life. Or, if he is at all inclined to recognize the priority of the scriptures, he may be also led by a foregone conclusion to suppose that the myth of the avatars might be connected with those periods that correspond to the respective stages in the evolution of the animal form, and are of value as a piece of antiquarian curiosity, as a vague anticipation of the modern theory that might have served its purpose in the past. Or, again, the doctrine of the tenfold descent may lead the reader to suppose that it refers in some way to the progress of material civilization culminating in the elimination of all unspiritual elements in an ideal future ensured by the progress of physical scientific knowledge. In reply to such speculations, we refer to the principles that have already been discussed at some length, viz. That the descents, avatars, of Vishnu are neither physical phenomena nor have they any reference to the progress of material civilization. But although the spiritual is eternally and categorically different from the material, it can be described to those who are totally unacquainted with its nature only by analogy with, and by means of terms that actually refer exclusively to, the mundane. This analogy is, however, not wholly inapplicable only if it be clearly and constantly remembered as an analogy and not as the spiritual entity itself that is analogically described. The individual soul in the bound state has to pass through forms of deluded existence that correspond analogically to the physical bodies with which he is successively endowed for the purpose. Those forms themselves are, however, material, and signify a progressive development of the functions of the incipient principle of the adventitious life of the false ego of the bound jiva. There is a regular chain of physical and mental progress on the mundane plane for the bound jiva. This progress, however, derives what deceptive appearance of reality it seems to possess from its being really the perverted reflection of the Absolute. But inasmuch as it happens to be a deluding reflection of the reality, it reproduces in an unwholesome and distorted form the features of its corresponding spiritual condition, which latter is the subject matter of the history of the 10 avatars. Godhead exists in all the forms in the realm of the Absolute that are reproduced in the distorted material phenomena of this universe. In the region of the Absolute there really exist eternally all varieties of jivas, and Godhead himself is there eternally manifest in all those forms. The adventitious physical form of the jiva in this world is material and limited, but the corresponding spiritual forms of the transcendental world are eternal, unlimited, self-conscious and free from all defect. The varieties of the forms of this world owe their relative existence, being related as shadow to substance or as darkness to light, to the real entities of the transcendental plane. The ordinary fish of the transcendental plane is not merely superior to the Darwins of this world, but his nature is realizable by a process that is only obscured by those very notions with which the physical form of the fish has been endowed by the mental speculations of the Darwinian science. However applicable these speculations may appear to us to be in respect of the evolution of the principle of life of this world, man as fully evolved animal in the Darwinian sense is too perverted a creature to be reclaimable by the form of Vishnu as fish, and hence the necessity of progressively fuller manifestation of the divinity for curing the evils of a progressively retrograding world. These descents, or manifestations of the divinity in this world, take place in all ages in accordance with the spiritual aptitude of the particular forms of material animation to whom they choose to appear. India has been the chosen land where in all the ages the descents, avatars, of the divinity have taken place. Indians have been fitted by the will of Godhead, by their spiritual Varnasrama institution to deserve this special favor. Sri Krishna is the own self of the absolute reality, Godhead himself. If Godhead simultaneously manifests himself in many places, and if those manifested forms happen to be equal to their source in respect of their qualities, activities, etc., those forms are designated as prakasha, manifest, murtis, forms of Godhead. There is usually no qualitative difference as between these manifest forms and the form that is their source. As for example, on the occasion of his marriage, Sri Krishna at one and the same time married, in qualitatively same but numerically different manifest forms, 16,000 consorts. And, on the occasion of the rasa pastime, he appeared simultaneously in the company of every one of the gopis as his partner in the dance. On the rasa site of Braja the manifest forms of the fullest source form made their appearance, and in the city of Dwaraka, on the occasion of his marriage with his consorts, the forms that manifested themselves were those identical with the full source form. No difference was observed to exist between those manifest forms and the source form. But we also hear of particular forms of direct manifestation for special purposes, and in those manifestations there are also observed differences as regards the form. As for instance, in the son of Devaki we find the four-armed form. In this instance, in spite of this difference in the form, the principle of direct manifestation is admitted. This also holds true in other similar instances. All these are prakasa, murtis of Sri Krishna or Godhead himself. Next to the above are Tadkatmarupas. These are divine forms that are essentially identical with that of Godhead himself. These may accordingly be called forms that are included in the nucleus of the divine form but are slightly different as regards their figures from Godhead's own form. These constituent forms are of two kinds according as they happen to be either L. forms for expanded activity, bilasa, or 2. constituent fractional forms, svangsa. Of these, he who possesses powers that are nearly equal to those of Godhead himself is called form for extended activity, bilasa, e.g. Sri Baladeva and Sri Vaikuntha Narayana. He whose powers are less than those of the form for extended activity is called the constituent fractional form of the divinity, e.g. the forms of fish, tortoise, etc. Next comes the manifestation of divine descent in the form of inspiration. He is called divinely inspired, into whom any one of the powers of the divinity is transfused. Such inspiration occurs only in the case of the highest individual souls, jivas. Divine inspiration is of two kinds according as the inspiration proceeds from Godhead himself or from the power of Godhead. The individual soul, jiva, who is inspired by Godhead regards himself as the divinity. He who is inspired by divine power considers himself as the servant of Godhead. Vyasadeva and Rishabhadeva, etc., are inspired avatars. Next come those avatars who are mainly of three kinds, viz. L. Purushavatara, i.e., descent of Godhead as master, 2. Gunavatara, i.e., descent of Godhead as the manifestation of any divine quality, and 3. Leelavatara, i.e., descent for the manifestation of transcendental activities. Of these, the avatara of Godhead in exercise of his supremacy is of three kinds, viz. L. The person who watches and guides the inmost purpose of primordial physical nature, creates the material principle itself and reposes in the liquid of the causal ocean without directly interfering in any phenomenal occurrences. Samkarsana and Mahavishnu are other names of this first of the Purushavatras. He is a constituent plenary subjective portion of Samkarsana, who is the second of the constituent enveloping forms of Sri Narayana, Lord of Vaikuntha. 2. The second Purushavatara controls from within the aggregate universe in its subtle stage, is the creator of Brahma and reposes in the spiritual liquid in the womb of physical nature. He is subjective plenary portion of Pradyumna, the third constituent enveloping form of the Lord of Vaikuntha. 3. The third Purusha guides the material universe in its constituent parts, that is to say, is the controller from inside of individual jivas as the supreme soul and reposes in the ocean of milk. He is the plenary subjective portion of Anrita, the fourth of the constituent enveloping forms of Sri Narayana. There are three Gunavatras, viz. Vishnu, Brahma and Siva. The third of the Purushas mentioned above is the same as Vishnu, who is the maintainer of this world by exercise of the quality of cognitive manifestation, sattva. Brahma, sprung from the navel lotus of Vishnu, is the creator by means of the active, rajas, quality and is only another aspect of Vishnu. In certain kalpas, i.e., regime of Brahma, jivas, as the result of their previous performance of pious deeds that make them fit for such distinction, may hold the high office of Brahma, the creator. Brahma of this type, by reason of the fact that the divine power is infused into a jiva, is also called inspired descent, avatara. Such a Brahma should not be regarded as the equal of Vishnu. In those kalps in which, due to the absence of jivas of requisite fitness, Vishnu himself plays the role of Brahma, it is only then that Brahma should be viewed as the equal of Vishnu. This principle holds in the case of all the gods who exercise any authority over nature, such as Indra, etc. They are sometimes jivas, possessed of special fitness, invested with the divine power, and sometimes they are Vishnu himself. From the lowest to the highest region of the universe, the aggregate of all material objects forms the gross body of Brahma. This also is called Brahma. The second Purusha who guides the inner workings of this aggregate is their lord or Isvara. Siva is the destroyer by means of the tamas, stupefying, quality. Brahma, who is sprung from the navel lotus Vishnu, effects the destruction of the world by assuming the form of Siva. In certain kalpas, pious jivas also hold the office of Siva, the destroyer. In certain kalpas again, Vishnu himself performs the act of destruction in the form of Siva. These destroyers are all called Gunavatras. But he who exists in the realm of Siva, Siva Ioka, inside Vaikuntha as Sade Siva, is not Gunavatara. He is devoid of worldly qualities and, like Narayana, is a manifestation, constituent form, or plenary subjective portion of Sri Krishna himself. Sadasiva stands to Siva in the relation of the whole to the derivative portion, is higher than Brahma and is equal to Vishnu. He is differentiated from Jiva by the fact that the latter is engrossed in worldly qualities. Next in order are the Leelavatras. These are 25, viz. Chatusana, Narada, Vraha, Matsya, Yana, Naranarayana, Kapila, Dada, Hayasarsha, Hamsa, Prisnigarbha, Rishabha, Prithu, Nrisinga, Kurma, Danwantari, Mohini, Vaimana, Parasurama, Raghunatha, Vyasa, Balabhadra, Krishna, Buddha and Kalki. These appear in every successive kalpa. The Manvantaravadras are all of them also Leelavatras but are so called as they rule over their respective Manvantaras, i.e., intervals between the appearance of one Manu and his next successor. There are 14 such avatras, e.g., Yana, Bibhu, Satyasena, Habi, Vaikuntha, Ajita, Vaimana, Sarbabhama, Rishabha, Bisvaksena, Dharmasitu, Sudama, Yojswara, and Brihadbanu. The Manvantaravata becomes the Yugavatara in a particular yuga, constituent age, of his Manvantara for the promulgation of particular forms of worship. There are 4 Yugavatras corresponding to the 4 yugas. The avatara of Satya Yuga is white, of Treta red, of Vipra green, and of Kali usually dark color. In the Kali Yuga there is also mentioned, rarely, a Yugavatara. Of these Yugavatras some are inspired, some are Prabhava, master, some Vaibhava, expansion, and some Parabhasta. Among these he who possesses the full power of the divinity is Parabhasta. In Vaibhava the power is less than in Parabhasta and in Prabhava the power is less than in Vaibhava. In Abhesha or inspired avatara there is manifestation of only a single potency. Chatusana, Narada and Prithu, etc. are inspired avatars. Matsya, fish, Kurma, tortoise, Narayana, Vraha, boar, Hayasarsha, horse-headed, Prisnigarbha, Balabhadra, Yana, etc. are Vaibhava, and Nrisinga, man-lion, Ramachandra and Sri Krishna are Parabhasta in the inverse order of superiority. Of these again Sri Krishna is Godhead himself. There is no one greater than he. Sri Krishna has 4 abodes, viz. Brahma, Madhupur, Dwaraka and Goloka, each superior to the next in the order of enumeration. Sri Krishna is fullest, sporting in Brahma with his own and with Baladeva. The same Krishna is fuller in Mathura and full in Dwaraka with his family and with Pradyumna and Anrada. In Goloka, although Sri Krishna is conceived as full, his Goloka activities being the same as those of Vrindavana, belong to the same category as the fullest. In these abodes, Dhammas, on account of the difference of the degree of predominance of the mellow quality, there is corresponding difference in the extent of the abeyance of the intensity of divine power as controlling force. That is to say, in proportion to the prevalence of mellowness there is corresponding obscuration of power as compelling force. In the netherworlds, due to lesser degree of mellowness, the aspect of authority becomes more and more manifest. Prithivi is the first envelope of the universe, constituted of the 14 worlds, beginning with Patala at one end and extending to Satyaloka on the other. This Prithivi as causes the ingredient and support of the phenomenal universe as effect. The phenomenal universe is successively encased by the 6 outer envelopes of water, heat, air, sky, the ego and Mahat. Outside these 7 the 8th case is nature, Prakriti. This last is full of profound darkness and is the support of the whole universe. Time in the form of the power of activity of the divinity is, in turn, the support of nature. Time is upheld by the will of Godhead. Beyond this is the stream of the Biraha, so named from the fact that its water washes off all mundane qualities. This stream is situated between the Chit, spiritual, and the Achit, material, worlds. The ocean of cause, Karana or Nava, is the alternative name of Biraha. In the liquid causal current of the Biraha, billions of worlds adorn the cavities of hair of Mahavishnu. Biraha is like the moat of Mahavaikuntha and the boundary of the luminous region of Brahman, which forms the outer limit of Sri Vaikuntha. Sri Golokadhamma is in the upper region of Sri Vaikuntha. The holy realm of Goloka is located in the center of all mundane and spiritual manifestations of the divine power. In Goloka, Sri Krishna abides with all his family as Lord of Goloka, acting as a god. Dwaraka, Mathura and Brah are the successive inner tracts of Goloka. In the abodes of Krishna bearing the names of Dwaraka, Mathura and Vrindavana, there is progressive increase in the proportion of mellowness due to the increasing preponderance of human activity. This Leela is of 2 kinds according as it happens to be, L. manifest, or, 2. non-manifest. The non-manifest Leela is the name of that eternal pastime in which Krishna engages simultaneously as boy, adolescent and approaching youth, in the company of his own mother, father, servants, friends, sweethearts, etc., in the infinite manifestation unperceivable by this world. The successive Leelas as boy, adolescent and dawning youth that he performs in the company of his kin and entourage in this world, in course of one and the same manifestation, are called his manifest Leela. The manifest Leela visible to this world has as its sole object the free bestowal of his mercy on the Jivas. It is eternal. No sooner does it end in one universe than it rises in another, like the rays of the sun lighting up the successive points of the zodiac in its progress. So that the manifest Leela is always enacted simultaneously in different worlds but in its due order of successive appearance. All the manifest Leelas of Sri Krishna in their perennial flow are eternal and are all existence, all consciousness and all bliss, with the exception of the Masala 1E1 and the Leela of the abduction of his consorts, which are illusory and intended to mask the eternal nature of the series of his transcendental pastimes. The devotees appear next in the order of descent. The Vaishnavas as Markandeya, Ambrish, Vasu, Vyasa, Vibhishana, Pundrik, Bali, Sambhu, Prahlada, Bidar, Uddhava, Dalya Parasara, Bhishma, Narada, etc., are the devotees of Godhead. It is our duty to serve all these devotees in the same way as we serve Sri Hari. Otherwise offense is committed. Among the devotees the order of superiority is as follows. Prahlada. The Pandavas who are superior to Prahlada. The Yadavas of whom Uddhava is superior to the rest. The Brahadevas superior to Uddhava. Sri Radhika is the highest among the damsels of Braha. The 4 yugas, viz. Satya, Treta, Dvapara and Kali are called Divya yugas. 1004 yugas form 1 kalpa. There are 14 manvantaras in each kalpa. 1 day of Brahma is equivalent to 1 kalpa. The pralaya or complete absorption that takes place at the end of every kalpa is known as the night of Brahma. This is the daily pralaya. 30 kalpas make 1 month of Brahma, 12 months of Brahma make 1 year, and 50 years of Brahma make 1 Petarartha. The duration of the life of Brahma is that of 2 Petararthas. At the end of the period of 2 Petararthas there is dissolution of phenomenal nature and the attainment of the highest state by Brahma. Thereupon the phenomenal world is reabsorbed into the primordial principle, Prakriti. The first of the series of the 30 kalpas bears the name of Svitavraha or Brahma Kalpa, and the last of the series as Pitri or Padma Kalpa. Thousands of the series of kalpas from Brahma to Padma have passed away thousands of times. Theism has a long history which may be summed up in one word as the descent of Godhead into this mundane world. Such descent accomplishes two divine purposes, viz. It is intended to gladden those devotees who may happen to be at the time in this world, and 2. To destroy Godhead's opponents who oppress his devotees and obstruct their devotional activities. These opponents of Godhead are also deputed by Godhead himself to serve him by the method of opposition. There is and can be no real independent rival of Godhead, such as a so-called Satan, to be the captain general of the sinners. The Asuras, who disturb the devotees and are in consequence destroyed by Vishnu, appear to sinful jivas to undergo chastisement that they deserve by reason of their ungodliness. But those who are privileged to be chastised by Godhead are no sinners. Such chastisement is the appropriate reward of their real service of Godhead, although of an indirect nature. They are servitors of Godhead who appear in the world being deputed by him for serving him in that way. By their opposition they serve to bring out most brilliantly the glory of Godhead. Ordinary jivas are not to follow their example, and, if they do so, they are not so easily delivered by direct divine intervention. The fallen jivas are only delivered when their aversion to Godhead is eliminated. Their aversion to Godhead is due to ignorance of their own proper nature as eternal servants of Godhead. The descent of Godhead into this world serves also to destroy the root of this ignorance of fallen jivas. This is his causeless mercy towards willful offenders. But all this is still only his secondary purpose. The main purpose of divine descent is to make the devotees happy. The secondary purposes are accomplished periodically by the various secondary avatars who are endowed with the requisite measure of the divine power for that purpose. But the main purpose, viz., that of making his devotees happy, is effected only by the descent of Godhead himself. Sri Baladeva is the ultimate source of all the secondary avatars. He may be regarded as occupying the position of viceroy for the performance of all official work of the sovereign. Sri Baladeva destroys the asuras and protects the devotees and re-establishes the rule of righteousness. Krishna himself comes into this world in the Svitavraha Kalpa, the cycle of the white boar, of the Vaivasvata Manvantara of the 28th aggregate of 4 yugas, appearing as son of Yasoda, in his own eternal human form in his fullest charm and power. The son of Yasoda is Godhead himself in his private, domestic, informal role, enjoying himself unreservedly in the company of his own most beloved ones. The process of the advent of Sri Krishna is thus described in the scriptures. As the different gods prepare to descend into this world through the medium of the series of their respective subjective portions, the heavenly plenary portions of Vasudeva, etc., such as Kasyapa, etc., merging with their original sources, viz., Vasudeva, etc., who belong to the eternal divine Leela, appear in Mathura Asura, etc. The highest personality of the divine Leela, viz., Sri Krishna, whose manifest form is Sri Narayana, Lord of Maha, Lakshmi, desiring to appear in Mathura, causes, first of all, the manifestation of his constituent form, Samkarsana. Thereupon the Lord, having decided to make visible 2 other forms that are plenary facsimiles of himself and who bear the names of Pradyumna and Anrada, manifests himself in the heart of Anakudandubi. After this, in response to the prayer of the gods for the purpose of relieving the hard-pressed mundane world, towards the close of the Dvapara age of the 28th aggregate of 4 yugas of the Vaivasvata Manvantara, Anrada, the same who lies in Kshiroda, merging with the form of Sri Krishna in the heart of Vasudeva, becomes manifest in the heart of Devaki, moving thither from the heart of Anakudandubi. Being nourished in the heart of Devaki by the nectar of loving bliss in the form of motherly affection, Sri Krishna, like the waxing moon, manifests the gradual development of his form in the heart of Devaki. Thereafter, in the great night of the 8th day of the dark fortnight of the month of Bhadra, Sri Krishna, disappearing from the heart of Devaki, appears in her couch in the lying-in chamber in the prison of Kamsa. The mother and the other people think that the baby is born by the ordinary worldly process with the greatest ease. Thereupon Vasudeva, entering the apartment of Yasoda in the great forest and leaving there his own son Sri Krishna and taking away the daughter of Yasoda, hurries back to his prison. Some ancient Bhagavatas also hold that the first of Sri Krishna's own facsimiles, who bears the name of Vasudeva, appears in the apartment of Vasudeva, and that in Gokula Sri Krishna, the highest personality of the divine Leela, makes his appearance in company of Yoga Maya. But Vasudeva sees only a daughter in the lying-in chamber of Yasoda. On Vasudeva's return to Mathura with Yasoda's baby daughter, Vasudeva emerges into Sri Krishna. This is corroborated by such statements as the following: Krishna born in the Yadava family is different. He who is full divinity is higher than he, that is to say, is his original source. Divinity in his plenitude, or Godhead himself, never leaves Brindabana, nor goes elsewhere. He is always two-armed and is never four-armed. He always sports in Brindabana in the company of only one of the gopis. In the Padma Purana it is stated that the cowherds of Brindabana, such as Nanda, etc., with all families and birds, beasts, deer, etc., all of them, by the grace of Vasudeva assuming the heavenly form and mounted in chariots, attained the region of the highest Vaikuntha. This is explained as follows: those constituent parts of the Lord of Brahma, etc., viz., Drona, etc., who had come down into this world, were sent by Sri Krishna to Vaikuntha. But Sri Krishna is always sporting in Brindabana in the company of his most beloved devotees, viz., the denizens of Brahma. The subject of the avatars of Vishnu is vast and intricate, and we have attempted merely to touch its outermost fringe in the above short account. But before we leave the subject, it will be useful to deal briefly with a few of the controversial issues that are ordinarily associated with this subject. A distinction has been made between different avatars of Vishnu on the basis of partial and complete manifestation, and the partial manifestations have also been graded one under another in different groups, so that we have also part of a part, and so on. These distinctions do not mean that Godhead is a divisible entity. In fact, in all these manifestations it is the indivisible and undivided divinity who appears. The difference is due either to the degree of manifestation or the greater or lesser presentation or reservation of any particular face or faces of the divinity. Godhead is one, but his powers are many and various, and he can exercise all those powers in the way that he likes. This distinction between the will of Godhead and the power of Godhead should be clearly grasped. The will of Godhead constitutes his distinctive and specific personality. It is not delegated. But the power, who is subordinate to the will, is capable of delegation by the will of Godhead. Godhead alone possesses an absolutely independent will to whom everything is subordinate. The wills with which other beings are endowed are more or less limited in their effectiveness. That is to say, they are controlled, as regards their effective exercise in the shape of exerting power, by the will of Godhead. The freedom of will of the jiva does not mean that the jiva can actually act as he likes, but that he is free to like or not like to act. The jiva has freedom to choose his course of action, but such choice can result in effective action only by the will of Godhead. The tendency is free, but its issue is strictly controlled. There is no such gap between the will and the power to act in Godhead. In him alone the two are identical but yet not the same. The power of Godhead is capable of delegation, but the will is not. Therefore it is the will that constitutes the specific character of divinity. The divine power is manifold, although she is one in essence, being the expression of the one and indivisible divine will. The gradation that is noticed in the case of the different avatars is in respect of distinction of power. Godhead chooses to manifest his powers partially or fully, directly or indirectly. This is what is meant by the gradation of the avatars of Vishnu. The partial manifestation is regarded as the plenary subjective portion, or amsa, of his proximate whole to whom he is immediately integrated. The relation between will and power is this, that the latter always acts under the direction of the former. Power does not regulate herself. Will is the active principle of whom power is the actively obedient associate. Power has no initiative of her own, but will is not effective unless he is associated with power. Such dissociation is never possible in the Absolute, in whom the two are eternally associated, and in this sense they may be regarded as being only complementary aspects of one and the same entity. Godhead's power is, therefore, not external or separable from Godhead himself, although she is always subordinate to his will. Godhead is the possessor of infinite powers. Of these, according to the scriptures, 3 only are realizable by the jiva, viz. L. The chit, cognitive energy, 2. Jiva, differentiated souls, and 3. Maya, limiting energy. There are also 3 functions that belong to each one of these 3 powers, viz. 1. Sandhini, uniting, 2. Sambit, enlightening, and 3. Hladini, harmonizing. These 3 functions are eternally operative in their pure and unmodifiable fullness in chit power. In differentiated souls they are also manifest but in an infinitesimally small measure. In Maya the presence of only their dim reflection in a perverted form is noticeable. To the individual soul the functions of the limiting energy are unwholesome. The functions of the individual soul himself, due to littleness of power, are inadequate although salutary. The jiva cannot attain perfect happiness except in conjunction with the hladini function of the power of enlightenment. This conjunction is possible only through the mercy of Krishna and his devotees. The coming down of the Absolute into this limited world effects the deliverance of fallen jivas by bringing about this conjunction between the bound jiva and the higher world. The difference of degree in the manifestation of the divine power represented by the different avatars is in accordance with the spiritual condition of the jiva at the time of such manifestation. The manifestation by way of descent attains its perfection in Krishna. The other avatars dispel the ignorance of the fallen jiva and arouse in him, in varying degrees, the desire to worship Godhead with awe and reverence. Krishna, who is the source of all the avatars, reserves to himself the right of bestowing love for Godhead. This constitutes the supreme excellence of the activities of Krishna when they appear in this world. In no avatara, except in a small measure in those of Nrsimha and Ramachandra, is to be found the extreme deliciousness of the relationship of jiva with Godhead characterized by confidence and intimacy that attains to freedom from all restraint in the case of the Brahagopis that is to be found in the Krishna Leela. Therefore, the mercy of Godhead reaches its climax in Krishna who appears before the bound jiva in the most intimate relationship, free from all reservation. The mercy of Krishna, inasmuch as he happens to be Godhead himself, is thus superior to that of all other avatars. This fact is at the root of the broad differences that constitute the dividing line between the various religions. Such difference is due to the degree of intimacy of relationship that it offers between the jiva and Godhead. But the mercy of Godhead, which is so continuously, copiously and causelessly manifested, cannot be realized by the bound jiva due to his ignorance of its real nature. Sri Caitanya came into this world to supply the knowledge of our natural relationship with Godhead which alone can enable us to realize the greatness of divine mercy. Sri Caitanya taught us that the highest service of Godhead, viz., that of unreserved loving devotion embodied in the Brahmadivas, is spontaneously attainable to all of us as soon as we fully realize our true relationship with Godhead. That relationship may be briefly described as that of serving Sri Krishna under the lead of the hladini function of the divine power. This is not an abstraction of the human brain. On the highest spiritual plane such service is realized as a part and parcel of the amorous pastimes of the damsels of Brah under the lead of Sri Radhika with the youthful son of the Lord of Brah. This is the highest significance of Krishna Leela and is exemplified in the career and teaching of Sri Caitanya. With these insufficient preliminary observations of a general character towards the elucidation of a number of current misconceptions on the subject of religion, I shall venture to proceed to narrate the transcendental career of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya in course of the following chapters. The narrative seeks to present the Absolute as he is in his supreme magnanimity. The career of Sri Krishna Chaitanya is identical with the Divine Personality in the form of his own loving service. It is not possible for individual souls, who are detached infinitesimal particles of the marginal potency of the divinity, to realize the nature of the loving service of the divinity by his own integrated power and his own proper function within the same, except by the eternal support of divine love himself. The magnanimous activity of Sri Krishna Chaitanya is identical with his coordinate absolute activity as the amorous lover of Sri Radhika and Sri Brindavana. The individual soul has, therefore, no access to the realm of the amorous pastimes of Sri Radha Govinda except by the realization of this identity of relationship between the two distinct Leelas. Noted the edition. The existing English works, although they sometimes profess to be historical, in reality offer a superficial, extremely crude and misleading view of the subject. They confine themselves almost exclusively to the esoteric issues. This at least is not the method of the source books, but a departure from the bona fide position of the theme itself. The historical method proper should aim at presenting the religion as it is really found in the genuine original sources and in the spirit of its first propounders. But many of these writers, due to their empirical training, have failed to observe this essential canon of historical judgment. Moreover, these writers generally happen to be very poorly equipped in respect of their knowledge of the vast body of scriptures to which the teachings of Sri Caitanya stand in the closest relationship. And, even if any of them happen to possess a general acquaintance with the texts of these scriptures, they fail to take a scientific view of the subject due to lack of spiritual insight. The prominent defect that mar the value of these works are the purely empiric point of view of their authors, their want of spiritual knowledge of the scriptures, and their lack of critical caution in the choice and use of authorities. The empiric method is unsuitable for the treatment of a spiritual subject. The vision of the empiricist is confined to things of this world. The Vaishnava authors on whose narratives we have to base our account of Sri Caitanya were not empiricists. The subject of which they have left us the account is the absolute, as distinct from the empiric, truth that comes down to them in the chain of disciplic succession from Godhead himself. They acquired this esoteric vision, when they proved to be true, by the methods of loyal submission and sincere service at the feet of spiritual preceptors as enjoined by the scriptures on all those who desire to obtain spiritual enlightenment. They are never tired of repeating that the absolute truth, inherent in a bona fide soul, who expresses himself in their books, is not derived from any experience of this world and is not intelligible to those whose vision is obscured by knowledge derived from the experience of this world. The absolute truth is transcendental and, therefore, no human being can attain to him by his sensuous efforts, i.e., by the ascending process, as all phenomena that are exposed to the faulty, limited senses are, by this virtue, non-transcendental. The absolute truth is eternally existent but is not realizable by men so long as they are not relieved of the aptitude of their defective vision. The absolute truth is to be received, undoubtedly in the spirit of honest inquiry, from those wise men who bear no reference to the world of their sensuous gratification. Very few of the existing English works on Sri Caitanya satisfy these essential conditions of theistic authorship that are so strongly insisted upon by these devotional writers, without which such description carries no useful purpose. On the contrary, these later writers are apt to offer their own views, derived from their empiric association, regarding the subject matter of the original works, in a manner that leaves on the mind of the reader the impression that they are more anxious to point out the crudities and errors of these old authors than exhibit their views in a scientific and impartial manner. This is certainly neither history nor religion, but only an uncalled for and useless distortion of both. The object of writing this book is to place before the English-knowing readers a strictly accurate theistic account of Sri Caitanya, who teaches the absolute truth that has been handed down through the ages by an unbroken succession of unbiased spiritual preceptors. This narrative is broad based on all the authoritative sources and seeks to fully present the esoteric side as explaining the esoteric in pursuance of the method of all really enlightened writers on spiritual subjects. The deeds of Sri Caitanya, the subject of the present work, are the living embodiment of the teaching of Srimad Bhagavatam. The deeds and teachings of Sri Caitanya stand alone as history of the service of the Supreme Lord in the form of the deepest and perfectly unreserved intimacy. The privilege of this form of service, the hidden truth of all scriptures, was never before given to the fallen jiva. In the words of Sri Rupa Goswami Prabhu, the authority on the esoteric significance of the deeds of Sri Caitanya, God himself with the beautiful golden complexion out of mercy appeared in this world in this most degenerate age to confer the grace of devotion to himself, of the superior order that had not been given to this world before. Even the Gita, which teaches the service of Godhead with single-minded devotion and in the spirit of complete self-surrender, does not tell us much about the actual, concrete form of the highest service. The Srimad Bhagavatam describes all different kinds of service in the concrete form and establishes the supreme excellence of that which was practiced by the transcendental milkmaids of Brahma. Sri Caitanya is the living embodiment of this highest and most intimate form of the service of the divinity. The Vrindavana pastimes of Sri Krsna, which have been given the place of honor in the greatest devotional work of the whole world, are of all forms of divine service the one that is also liable to be most grossly misunderstood. The subject will be treated in greater detail in its proper place in the body of this work. It will suffice for our purpose here to state that Sri Caitanya made clearly manifest by his deeds and teachings what this form of service really means. His deeds are in fact the Brahma Sutra, Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam displayed to our view in the living form. He is the living Vedanta. Other avatars and prophets have taught the reverential worship of the Supreme Lord. Sri Caitanya proved by his deeds that the highest form of service is to be found in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that its inner meaning had not been properly understood up to his time by anybody, and that it offers what all the scriptures have been endeavoring from eternity unsuccessfully to express. Sri Caitanya's own career is the concrete living expression of this highest form of the service of the Lord. The materials for the present work have been drawn from 1. The Sikshastakam of Sri Caitanya, which gives the summary of his teachings in his own words. 2 and 3. The Karkas, Memoirs of Sri Murari Gupta and of Sri Swarup Damodar, the latter as embodied in his works by Sri Raghunath Das Goswamin, Sri Swarup Damodar's closest associate. 4. Prema Vivarta of Sri Jagadananda. 5. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Chandrada Nataka of Kavi Karnapur. 6. Sri Chaitanya Charita Mahakavya of Sri Chaitanya Das, the elder brother of Kavi Karnapur. 7. The works of Sri Prabodhananda Saraswati. 8. The Bhajanamrita of Sri Narahari Sarkar Thakur. 9. The numerous works left by 5 of the famous 6 Goswamians. 10. Sri Brian Bandas Thakur's Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. 1. Sri Lakhandasa's Chaitanya Mangal. 12. Sri Krishnadas Kavira's Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and lastly, 13. The works of those later writers who have strictly followed the above authors. Most of these works are in Sanskrit, some of them in Bengali. Sri Chaitanya has not left any books written by himself. A few shlokas composed by him are quoted in the works of his associates, the chief of them being the Sikshastakam, which gives in 8 stanzas a summary of his teachings. Sri Brindabandas Thakur was the recipient of the favor of Sri Nityananda, the associated facsimile, so to say, of Sri Chaitanya. His mother Sri Naryani was the niece of Sribash Pandit, the foremost of those Vaishnava householders who were the direct followers of Sri Chaitanya. Sri Lakhandas got the materials of his work partly from Narahari Sarkar Thakur, one of Sri Chaitanya's close associates, and by his devotional impressions. Sri Krishnadas Goswamin got his information, as has already been mentioned, from his preceptor Sri Raghunath Das, one of the 6 Goswamians. Most of the works of the authors named above are still extant, and they are the authorities for all subsequent writers. The chief of these later authors whose works have been consulted in the compilation of the present account are 1. Sri Narottamdas Thakur, who was the disciple of Sri Lokanath Goswamin, one of the closest associates of Sri Chaitanya. 2. Sri Viswanath Chakravarti, belonging to the line of disciples of Sri Narottamdas Thakur. 3. Sri Baladev Vidyabhusan, the first Gaudiya commentator of the Brahma Sutra. 4. Sri Narahari Chakravarti, in the line of disciplic descent from Sri Viswanath Thakur. 5. Sri Bhaktivinod Thakur, the sincere guardian of the true Vaishnavas of the present day. And 6. My Sri Gurudeva, His Divine Grace Paramahansa Paribrajakarya Sri Srimat Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, whose mercy is my only hope of attaining the service of Godhead. It will be seen from the above that there is no lack of materials of the most reliable character available to the historian of the career and teachings of Sri Chaitanya. It is, therefore, rather strange that the personality of Sri Chaitanya has been misunderstood and misrepresented by a certain class of writers. The neglect of the original sources was one cause of this. A constructive motive was supplied by the animosity of Kshatriyans and the greed of worldly interests of pseudo-followers. It was the life work of Thakur Bhaktivinod to rediscover the true history of Sri Chaitanya and make the same available to the present generation. The magnitude of this service to his country, to humanity, and to all animate beings time alone will show. The eternal religion taught and practiced by Sri Chaitanya have been made intelligible to the modern reader by the labors of Thakur Bhaktivinod. It is bound to react most powerfully on all existing religious convictions of the world and make possible the establishment of universal spiritual harmony, of which the whole world stands so much in need. Most of the works of Thakur Bhaktivinod were, however, written in Bengali and Sanskrit. The present work is a slight attempt to present in the English language an outline of the life and teachings of Sri Chaitanya made known by Thakur Bhaktivinod, the pioneer of the movement of pure devotion in the present age, which aims at re-establishing in practice the eternal religion of all animate beings revealed in the scriptures and taught and practiced by Sri Chaitanya. The activities of my most revered preceptor are well known to the world. His divine grace is commissioned by Godhead to spread the teaching of Sri Chaitanya to every village of the world and re-establish the spiritual society. This was foretold by Thakur Bhaktivinod. Gaura Hari Bal. Visada Sattva De Sanya Dasa. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga Sri Krishna Chaitanya. Val. A. By Nisakanta Sanyal, M.A. Bhakta Shastri Senior Professor of History, Ravan Shakalg, Cuttack, with a foreword by Paramahamsa Paribrajakarya. 108. Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Goswami, President of Sri Vishwa Vaishnava Raj Sabha, published by Tridandi Swami Bhakti Hridaya Ban Sri Gaudiya Meth, Royapeta, Madras 1933, Inland RS. 15. 4ing 21s. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga Volume E. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Auspicatory Observance. I make my prostrated obeisance to Sri Guru in the two forms of the guide who imparts enlightenment and those who teach the function of divine service to prevent lapse into the conditioned state by ensuring progressive advance on the path of devotion. Obeisance to the devotees of the Lord, to the Supreme Lord Himself, to those eternal forms in which the Lord manifests His appearances, avatars, on this mundane plane, to His different manifestations and His powers. I bow to the name Krishna Chaitanya, who is Krishna Himself and all the divine categories. Obeisance to Sri Krishna Chaitanya with Lord Nityananda, who are like the sun and the moon risen in conjunction on the eastern hill of Gauda. Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya manifested his appearance in this world in order to give away by his causeless mercy the highest loving service of himself that had never been bestowed on the conditioned souls of this world prior to his appearance. May Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya, resplendent with the concentrated hue of body as shining gold, manifest himself in the inmost chamber of the hearts of all persons. Submission to Sri Hari, Sri Guru and the Vaishnavas is the only condition of attaining to loving devotion to the feet of Sri Krishna and his devotees. The fulfillment of this condition assures the success of the undertaking by enabling all persons who listen to the narrative of the deeds of Sri Krishna Chaitanya to obtain his mercy in the shape of the highest quality of devotion to the feet of Sri Radha Krishna. Sri Krishnadas Kavira Goswami in the opening verses of his work on the deeds of Sri Krishna Chaitanya has mercifully explained in some detail, for our benefit, the nature, purpose and necessity of the auspicatory observance as a preliminary for the success of all spiritual undertakings. I can do no better than follow in his footsteps by attempting to explain the significance of the form of the auspicatory observance. The auspicatory observance consists of three parts, viz. 1. The postulation of the subject matter, 2. Benedictory purpose, and 3. Offering of submissive obeisance. The subject matter of the present work is Sri Krishna Chaitanya. Sri Krishna Chaitanya is identical with Sri Krishna. He is the final and absolute reality. He is Isvara, the Gurus, the devotees, the divine appearances and the divine powers. These are the distinctive divine identities. The undifferentiated Brahman of the Upanishads is the glow of his person. The Oversoul, who indwells and regulates every entity, is his portion. Bhagawan, who is full of all supremacy, all power, all glory, all beauty, all knowledge and freedom from every mundane desire, is Sri Chaitanya. There is no higher entity than Chaitanya and Sri Krishna. The deeds of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya are narrated in this work. His deeds were made manifest to the view of the people of this world that all conditioned souls may be enabled thereby to attain to the realization of loving devotion to the feet of Sri Sri Radha Govinda, which constitutes the highest platform of the service of the divinity and the knowledge of which had not been divulged to any soul of this world by any former dispensation. All this will flash to the hearts of all persons who really seek for the truth, by the causeless mercy of the son of Sri Sachi Devi wearing the yellow color of shining gold. The deeds of Sri Chaitanya are grounded in his divinity. The activity of the Hladini potency born of the reciprocal love of Sri Sri Radha Krishna, who constitute one personality, brings about differentiation of divine body as couple. The two bodies of the divine couple reunite as Chaitanya. The united form is Krishna's own self clothed with the glow of the beauty of Sri Radhika. The secondary purpose of the appearance of Sri Krishna Chaitanya in this world found in the scriptures is what has been stated above, viz. The bestowal of loving devotion to all conditioned souls. But there was another purpose which is the main cause of his appearance. It is not explicitly mentioned in the scriptures but is recognizable as their hidden import. The main purpose of the appearance of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya is connected with his distinctive nature that has been indicated. Krishna is anxious to learn how his divine counterpart, Sri Radhika, realizes his own sweetness and beauty. In order to have this experience, Sri Krishna clothes himself with the mood of Sri Radhika and appears in the form of an eternal union with her, alongside of and identical with the coupled form. This is the inner hidden significance of the deeds of Sri Krishna Chaitanya. This distinguishes the Leela of Sri Chaitanya from that of Sri Krishna. Sri Nityananda and Sri Advaita are inseparably associated with the appearance of Sri Chaitanya in this world. It is not possible to realize the nature of the deeds of Sri Chaitanya without the knowledge of the personalities of Sri Nityananda and Sri Advaita. Through Nityananda and Advaita the connection of Sri Krishna with the mundane world is established and maintained. This brings us to the question of the transcendental cosmology of the scriptures. There is a gradation of spheres one above another up to Goloka, the abode of Sri Krishna. In Goloka are found Baladeva, Pradyumna and Anrada, the other selves of Krishna. Nityananda is identical with Baladeva in Goloka. Below Goloka, in the realm of the Absolute, is Vaikuntha. In Goloka, Balarama or Baladeva is the serving self of Krishna, Bilas Bigraha. Baladeva is Krishna in the role of serving his own self in various capacities. Vaikuntha is the realm of the exclusive activities of Baladeva. In Vaikuntha, accordingly, the fourfold expansion of Sri Narayana, the Lord of Vaikuntha, the manifestation of Baladeva corresponds to the other selves of Krishna in Goloka, with the difference that in Vaikuntha the expansion, Vyuha, is of the other self of Krishna or Baladeva, who is delegated the power of expressing his service of Sri Krishna in a realm of his own, where his plenary manifestation, Sri Narayana, is served by the method of reverence. Baladeva and his realm of Vaikuntha express and serve the majesty of Sri Krishna. The conception of the service of Sri Baladeva, the majestic other self of Krishna, is the highest that is reached by the help of such imperfect revelation as is not wholly unacceptable to the empiric instinct, although the practice of this pure form of the reverential service is also very rare in this world. All the revealed scriptures, with the single exception of the Bhagavatam, are to a more or less extent the textbooks of reverential worship. The reverential service of Godhead in its genuine form is wholly free from any mundane grossness, although there is in it a comparative reference of eligibility. The ordinary degenerate practices of the revealed religions are a caricature of the real function, which cannot be realized till the soul is released from the fetters of nescience. In Vaikuntha there exist positive transcendental activities resulting from the relationships of servants and master between the individual souls and Godhead. But Godhead is there present in his majesty and not in his beauty and sweetness, except in the sense that is compatible with the predominance of his majesty. The ideal of heaven and paradise of the elevationist religions is a misrepresentation of Vaikuntha in terms of mundane felicity. Vaikuntha is, however, the goal that is dear to ordinary theistically inclined persons with pure morals. It is substantially inconceivable but is not apparently opposed to the ordinary aspirations and functions of this world, at the first sight. Next below Vaikuntha is the realm of the Brahman, in which there is no specific spiritual activity, neither any form of worldly existence, but which is full of a light which has the negative quality of dispelling all worldly ignorance without having power to disclose the specific nature of the transcendental realm. This is the realm of the Brahman of the Upanishads, which has been the source and support, as manipulated by Sri Sankaracharya, of the empiric worship current in this country that denies the existence of Godhead and substitutes in place of the religion of his service one aiming at complete spiritual annihilation by the process of merging the individual soul in the divinity. As a matter of fact, the realm of the Brahman of the Upanishads is not a habitable region at all, but a sphere of light which has to be got across to reach the realm from where it proceeds, and with which alone the emancipated soul can have anything really to do. The realm of the Brahman is the outer limit of the absolute world. Between this outer uninhabited zone of the spiritual realm and the highest sphere of this mundane world there flows the stream of the Viraha, whose water is the causal essence in the nascent form of liquid. This liquid is pure from all mundane quality. A person who bathes in the river prior to entry into the realm of the Brahman is freed from all mundane aptitudes. It is in this stream that there appears the Purusha, who is the derivative of Balarama, being a secondary plenary form of the divinity. There are three Purushas in the successive order of such secondary derivative manifestation, viz. 1. He who lies in the ocean of the causal water of the Viraha, 2. He who lies in the water of the ocean of milk, and 3. He who lies in the ocean of the fluid of the womb of the worlds. It is these Purushas, the secondary extended selves of Baladeva, each being the proximate source of the one next following him, who are the creators and regulators of the mundane world without being themselves any constituent part or whole of the same. The first of these three Purushas wills the creation of the world and wills to make use of the deluding potency for the purpose. In respect of the process of material creation, he occupies the position that the potter occupies in the making of pots of clay. The potter's wheel, clay and appliances attain their effective existence by another potency of the same Purusha. It is, therefore, the first of the series of the Purushas who is the source of both the efficient as well as material cause of creation. But in neither capacity he himself belongs to this world. He does all this work from outside the plane of the limiting energy. Brahma and Siva are connected with the material energy by actual incorporation with her. While Vishnu, the Purusha, although exercising his function with reference to the material world, is situated wholly beyond all touch with the material energy. The Purushas bear the name of Vishnu by reason of this transcendental pervading relationship with the mundane world. As transcendence, in the form of both cause and material of the mundane creation, belongs to the first Purusha. The second Purusha is charged by him with the function of the collective regulation of the created entities. The third Purusha performs the same function from inside each separate created entity. These two, therefore, are the sources of those spiritual functions that bear some analogy to the imperfect empiric notions enunciated by Kant and other philosophers of the idealist schools of the West, conveyed by the ill-defined terms immanence and transcendence. These terms of the empiric vocabulary refer to aspects of limited phenomena, but the immanence and transcendence of the third and second Purusha avatars of Vishnu are not a continuum of the material shelf which is called phenomenon. There is always the categorical difference of plane between the phenomena and the spiritual transcendent and immanent functions of Vishnu that have a reference to them by way of being their spiritual source. The functions of Brahma and Siva are those of creation and destruction. These two great personages belong to this phenomenal world and are in charge of its temporal regulation in a semi-conscious manner. The semi-conscious nature of the ruling functions of Brahma and Siva makes them the prototypes of the conditioned soul. They are the ideals of personality conceivable by the mind of men, possessed of the superhuman powers of creation and destruction of all phenomena. The nature of this power itself is not intelligible to its wielders, although they knew that they are really endowed with the same by some unknown superior agency in an unknown manner. There are other powers of this class who wield similar but lesser powers over the phenomenal world than Brahma and Siva. These superhuman beings possessed of specific powers over physical nature in different measures are the highest order of souls in the conditioned state. The will of Vishnu in the forms of the three Purushas is ultimately derived from Nityananda. The source of the material cause of creation is also Vishnu in the form of the first Purusha or Mahavishnu, in whom the material cause and creating will of the divinity by reference to this mundane world are incorporated and reconciled. The word Advaita means non-duality. Matter and will are not categorically different from one another at their source. Neither are they, as regards their source, different from Godhead. But matter as it appears to the conditioned soul as well as the operative will of Godhead as viewed by the same agency, appear to be altogether dissociated from and incompatible with the spiritual essence which is the nature proper of the divinity. The solution of this difficulty that besets all speculative inquiry is to be sought in the actual knowledge of the substantive reality in his graduated manifestations and not in the hypotheses of inevitable ignorance of fundamental conditions. The appearance of Sri Krishna Caitanya, so far as the event has a reference to the deliverance of conditioned souls, was effected by the agencies of Nityananda and Advaita. The functions of Nityananda and Advaita should, however, be neither overestimated nor underestimated as regards their respective bearings on the deeds of Sri Krishna Caitanya. Those functions are of primary importance to the conditioned soul who, however, need not, therefore, remain confined to the contemplation of these plenary manifestations of the divinity. Neither need the conditioned soul suppose himself to be above all help from Advaita and Nityananda either at the initial or the advanced stages of spiritual endeavor and realization. The real purpose of the appearance of Sri Krishna Caitanya is not the deliverance of the conditioned souls. The real purpose is one that exclusively concerns the divinity as he is. It is that which was meant when we observed above that the deeds of Sri Krishna Caitanya, as those of Sri Krishna, are grounded in his divinity. The knowledge of those deeds is identical with the deeds themselves. It is for this reason that it is necessary to approach this narrative with the reverence and confidence that is due to the person of Godhead himself. Such reverence and confidence are also necessarily complete. There must be no reservation. The least reservation will lead the hearer or reader of this narrative to a certain phase of the limited energy and not even to the level of the Purusha avatars who are related to this world without being of it. But the mercy of Sri Krishna Caitanya enables all conditioned souls to pass through in these graded stages of spiritual progress by appearing to us in the form of this divine narrative of his deeds. This narrative has been made available by the mercy of Sri Advaita and Sri Nityananda, who are the eternal divine intermediaries between ourselves and the Supreme Lord. The function of making our prostrated obeisance to Hari, Guru and the Vaishnavas is not an idle or symbolic ceremony. It is exercise of the function of devotion to Godhead made possible by the causeless grace of Sri Advaita, who is the source of the material as well as the sanction of all spiritual functions of us conditioned souls under all circumstances. Obeisance to Sri Advaita is obeisance to the Vaishnavas. Obeisance to Nityananda is obeisance to Sri Guru. Obeisance to Sri Krishna Chaitanya is obeisance to Godhead himself as he is. Obeisance to Sri Krishna Chaitanya is obeisance both to Sri Krishna and his divine counter whole Sri Radhika in one. The relationship of Sri Radhika to Sri Krishna must not be confounded with the mundane sexual relationship between male and female of this world. The service of Sri Radhika is not an amorous function in the disruptive specific and wholesome sense of the analogous mundane activity. That supposition, which is due to the mundane import of the term used in describing the divine function, may lead the ignorant critic to presume to find the defect of the mundane passion in even the divine activity as he is, i.e., in his fullest and most perfect manifestation. It is, therefore, necessary to implore our readers not to approach the study of this narrative in such an necessarily irreverent and superficial temper which will necessarily prevent his regarding the subject from the only genuine point of view, viz., that of the scriptures. It is only by loyally following the method of submitting to look at the subject unreservedly from the point of view of the narrative itself that it will be possible for the impartial reader, after he has gone through his self-imposed task with the patience that is due to the right understanding of a subject which is likely to be radically different, at any rate to many of our European readers, from most current standards in its outlook on and valuation of the activities of this world, to attempt to form a comparative estimate of the view of the absolute that is presented to him in the following pages. Vaishnavism stands alone among the revealed religions of the world in providing a specific account of the name, form, qualities, activities and the individual personalities of the servitors of Godhead himself. The silence of the other religions on this subject should not be misunderstood as implying the non-existence of any or all specification in the absolute. There is also no rational ground for supposing that Godhead is unwilling or unable to disclose his own specific self and divine paraphernalia to the serving impulse of pure souls. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga Sri Krishna Chaitanya. Chapter I, Country and Society. The historical significance of the term Gauda, the name that is borne by the country of Sri Chaitanya's nativity, is obscure. It occurs in the works of the famous grammarian Painini as the name of a well-known city of the East. The geographical location of the regions bearing the name, referred to in ancient literature, presents a bewildering variety, being applied to tracts and towns scattered in all directions and attaining an extent that is sometimes equivalent to the greater part of northern India. It supplies the designation to a wide division of the Brahmanas, a well-known style of the Sanskrit rhetoricians, and a technical term, connected with the metal silver, to the industrialists of old India. The name of the spiritual preceptor of Sri Sankaracharya is Gaudapada, while Sriman Madhvacharya, an inhabitant of the extreme south of the country, bears the interesting name of Gaudapurnananda. No theory regarding the historical origin or application of the word is yet forthcoming that offers any satisfactory clue to the copious use of the word by the ancients in such diverse connections. There is evidence to prove that there were similar grades in the geographical denotation of the word Gauda also at the period of the advent of Sri Chaitanya. It was then applied to 1. The country under the rule of the Mohammedan king of Bengal, 2. To his capital situated in the modern district of Malda, 3. To the tract adjoining the old town of Nabadwap to which the capital of the country had been transferred from Gauda in Malda by Lakshmana Sena, the last independent Hindu king of Bengal. 4. While the compound Pancha Gauda, the 5 Gaudas meant practically the whole of northern India and, specifically, 5. The 5 countries of Krsna, Kannauj, Utkal, Mithila and Gauda, Bengal. 6. The Brahmana residents of which regions were also designated as Pancha Gauda. The terms Gauda and Gauda Mandala, circle of Gauda, used by the associates and followers of Sri Chaitanya Deva as a designation of themselves and their country, mean the greater part of the modern province of Bengal with old Nabadwap, the city of the 9 islands, as center. And for the purpose of this narrative we shall accordingly accept this external regional denotation of the word, without losing sight of its true spiritual import. But it is well at the very outset to remind our readers of the historical fact that neither the land nor the activities of Sri Chaitanya are regarded by the authors of the works that form the original sources of this account as historical, geographical, or any other entities in the mundane sense. The Gauda Mandala, or circle of Gauda, is to them the spiritual realm of the appearance of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya and his eternally associated devotees. The spiritual significance of their attitude may be thus indicated. Godhead is all-powerful. There is a transcendental world in which he dwells with his own. The only business of all inhabitants of that world is to serve Godhead directly. That world is the spiritual world. It is free from all limitations and defect of this mundane world. When Godhead chooses to come down into this world, he never does so only by himself. Just as a high and mighty sovereign of this mundane world, when he chooses to favor a remote part of his dominions with his royal visit, goes there with his attendants and other paraphernalia of sovereignty, in like manner Godhead also descends into this world with his own, his servitors, all his divine paraphernalia, and his eternal spiritual realm. It is not possible for any earthly sovereign, even if he is so minded, to move out with all the circumstances and pomp of his royal magnificence, for sheer want of power and for other obvious reasons. But Godhead is not troubled by such difficulties. He is here in this world with his realm and complete followings and is present at one and the same time in his fully manifest realm of the spiritual world. That is to say, divinity and his realm without being duplicated, is capable of revealing himself according to the serving aptitude of mundane beholders. It is this which happens when the Supreme Lord manifests his auspicious appearance in this world. The realm of God in which Sri Krishna Caitanya appears with his kindred, associates and eternal devotees is not the mundane region that is visible to the eyes of conditioned souls. The spiritual circle of God that appears to bound jivas in the figure of a definite tract of land of this physical world is, in reality, in its own manifest nature, no other than the white island, Svetadvipa, of the scriptures, the eternal realm of the divinity in his own most beneficent form. This principle of spiritual identity of periodic manifestation also applies to other parts of the sacred land of Bharata, India. This sacredness of the land is not a figment of the human imagination nor due to any association of any mundane country with the appearances of the divinity by way of fortuitous concurrences. The holy realm of Godhead, in all its infinite vastness and diversity, appears also in this world being identical with spiritual Bharata, India, as its center. But spiritual Bharata is not always manifest to the view of fettered souls. When the divinity chooses to come down into this world, the spiritual realm is also unveiled to the unobstructed gaze of mortals. But unbelievers do not see what is then really open to their view, just as the owl does not see the light of the sun when he shines in all his midday splendor. It would not also be in strict conformity with historical judgment to regard the view just sketched as an exaggeration of patriotic partiality for the land of one's mundane birth. The Vaishnava point of view is that everything of this world is to be used in the service of Godhead, and it is only by such use of the most beautiful and valued things of this world that man is enabled to earn the position of the highest distinction that is open to him on this condition. This level of view regarding human life and this world, which marks the highest achievement of human civilization, has, of all countries of the world, been most nearly realized by the spiritual community of Vaishnavas in India. Indeed, Godhead himself comes into this world only for the sake of the Vaishnavas who follow faithfully his highest teaching by desiring, instead of piety, dharma, wealth, sensuous pleasure, relief from worldly misery, etc., which are universally coveted by all mortals, only the unconditional service of the divinity. In all parts of the world less spiritual people have always been engaged in a perpetual strife for the fulfillment of their mundane aspirations. Godhead has sometimes sent his agents to teach the peoples of other countries the transitory and miserable end of all worldly pursuits and thereby win them to desire for liberation and moral living. But such mere improvement of the procedure of earthly pursuits effected thereby, the summum bonum, in the shape of the unalloyed spiritual service of the Supreme Lord, is never attained. The quasi-spiritual ideals help at best to establish a certain apparently moral order amidst the unrestrained pursuit of sensuous activities. These facts offer the undisputed evidence that is historically available to all of us, which establishes the spiritual superiority of the theistic civilization in India and its premier claim to the mercy of the divinity by the sole right of his unalloyed service. The patriotic or any other worldly sentiment has no place in such views. As India is thus the most sacred country of the world, the land of God is the most sacred of all parts of India. This is so because it corresponds to Svetadvip wherein the divinity abides eternally as embodiment of perfect magnanimity. The land Braha, full of the most exquisite bliss, is the realm of the most delicious rasa one amorous dance of Krishna in the circle of the spiritual milkmaids. One pastimes of youthful Krishna who is identical with Sri Caitanya. The land of God is most liberal, as it is only here that Godhead manifests the Leela ie of bestowing on all the unalloyed love for himself which alone confers on the emancipated jiva of three the right of entry into the happy realm of Braha and join there in the eternal pastimes of Sri Sri Radha Govinda. Therefore, for the same reason which makes the Svetadvipa in Sri Brindavana more magnanimous, the land of Gauda is more liberal than the enchanting realm of Bra overflowing with every bliss. There is also a corresponding mellowness in the subdued charms, reminiscent of the chastened mood of faithful lovers temporarily parted, of this land of Gauda, which can be utilized by anyone who cares to enter its wide portals ever open to receive, with the unspeakable welcome of divine love in its most unreserved and indiscriminate generosity, all those who want to receive the summum bonum free gift from the hands of Godhead himself. The reader will now be in a position to understand why the Vaishnava authors expatiate on the minutest features of the holy circle of Gauda with such intense devotional fervor, and why we can perfectly rely on any information of a historical or geographical nature that they may have cared to record, as being free from all sectarian bias in its ordinary narrow worldly sense. As the genuine Vaishnava authors have nothing to do that is worldly either in their life or in their faith, for which alone they live. Most of these Acharyas lived by themselves a secluded life far from home and family, on scanty alms procured by short rounds of day-to-day begging or given unsolicited by well-wishers, and in the humblest styles conceivable even in India. Many of them discarded inherited worldly affluence for greater convenience of devoting themselves to the practice of the religion which forms the subject of this work, and for recording and expounding its principles for the benefit of all animate beings. Such is the spiritual circle of Gauda, and all truly pure souls are the denizens of the eternal realm of the divinity. The remains of old Nabadwip, the city of the Nine Islands, are situated at the junction of the Bhagirathi and Jalangi rivers about 65 miles above Calcutta. The present town of Nabadwip, one of the 9 islands of Old Nabadwip. The name Nabadwip at the time of Sri Caitanya was applied to the actual conglomerate of 9 separate islands cut up by the channels of the Bhagirathi, which had their different individual designations also. The main part of the old city was situated on the eastern bank of the Bhagirathi, which split up Nabadwip into 2 groups of islands, of which 4 bearing respectively the names of Antardwip, Simantadwip, Gadrumadwip and Madhyadwip were to the east, and the remaining 5, viz. Kaladwip, modern town of Nadia, Ratudwip, Janudwip, Madadrumadwip and Rudradwip, were located to the west of the main channel of the Bhagirathi. These details are given clearly in several of the old books, and they are supplemented by bits of topographical notices of old Nabadwip that have been recorded by later writers who treated the subject in pursuance of the traditional description. Antardwip, as its name implies, was the central island, or the heart of the old town. Sri Mupur, the quarter of Nabadwip which contained the house of Sri Jagannatha Misra, the father of Sri Caitanya, was located in the center of Antardwip. Accordingly, the old chroniclers, in describing Nabadwip, always compare it to a full-blown lotus afloat on the stream of the Bhagirathi. The 8 islands surrounding Antardwip, which is the core of the lotus, are described as forming its 8 extended petals. Holy Mupur, with the Yogapitha or the house of God, is described as the central part of the core. The house of God thus forms the central point of an immense circle, of which the circumference is stated to be 32 miles. This is the circle of the 9 islands. The circle of Gauda is stated these writers to be 168 miles in circumference. The Vaishnava authors are tireless in reminding their readers that these places, appearing to mortal eyes as the divisions of an ordinary tract of land of this earth, must never be regarded as the real Nabadwip and should not be reverenced as such. Such reverence would constitute an offense against the abode of the divinity which is transcendental. They lend no countenance to the practice, so prevalent in all parts of the world, of putting the seal and label of mundane history and geography on spiritual sites and occurrences, a practice that has been the parent of much misery and of the worst superstitions that abound in all the ancient creeds. The divine cannot be pinned down to any place, time or event of this world. There cannot be a greater offense against Godhead than to suppose that his body or anything pertaining to him can at all be of the nature of the things of this world. So Nabadwip of Vaishnavas is not a geographical town bearing the name situated in the geographical country known to the historians and geographers of this world under the name of Gauda. Such a place is not only not Nabadwip, but if it is ever considered as real Nabadwip, the latter refuses to manifest her proper form to the view of an offender who chooses to think in this unspiritual way. Real or spiritual Navadwip, real or spiritual Sri Mupur and real Yogapitha are open only to the view of the Vaishnavas or uneclipsed serving souls, and whatever they say about the divine realm is also, therefore, necessarily true. what other people designate as Nabadwap or Srimupur or the circle of Gauda or Bharatavarsha, inasmuch as it happens to be the mundane view, is entitled to no hearing from a Vaishnava, and the very notion that the realm of the divinity can possibly be any other than spiritual should be most carefully discarded once for all by those who want to understand what the Vaishnavas have really to say. The reader, who complains that such a procedure will block the way of impartial scientific inquiry, would not also be quite reasonable, because it is he who, under this unscientific pretext, really wants to block the way of the only true inquiry. What the Vaishnava wants the empiric scientist to admit is that he should allow the devotee to deliver the tidings of the spiritual realm and not to insist on identifying the geography and history of this world with the geography and history of the spiritual realm. The empiricist is also not entitled to exclude spiritual geography and history from the account of the spiritual events if his purpose really be to represent a thing as it actually is, by available evidence, and not as he thinks it ought to be. The two categories are quite distinct from one another, and it would be fair to the spiritual subject to admit unreservedly its transcendental nature, not merely in theory but in practice as well. If the career of Sri Caitanya is written in accordance with the rules laid down by empiric biographers, the narrative would be worse than a parody. It would be a blasphemy. Such a performance is not the purpose of the writer. His object is to faithfully record the events as he finds them in the original sources, offering no opinion of his own except only such as help the elucidation of the subject in its spiritual sense, which is foreign to ordinary mundane experience. This method leads to frequent digressions to caution both the writer as well as the readers at every step not to misunderstand the subject. These digressions, which are offered as the real explanation of the subject, have been gathered from the monumental works of the Acharyas, who quote text and verse of the scriptures to prove by scriptural evidence the absolute truth of every word they write, and take no credit for originality, and in conformity with the personal experience of the transcendental teaching and activities the writer's most revered Gurudeva and his associates. The geographical site of the Yogapitha, the abode of Godhead, passed out of the memory of most people due to the misfortune reflected by tradition of havoc wrought by the shiftings of the course of the Bhagirathi. The religion taught by Sri Caitanya was not properly grasped by posterity and suffered from misrepresentation in the hands of pseudo-teachers who soon abounded at Nabadwap and in other parts of the country. There have, indeed, been a small number of persons forming the inner following of the Acharyas in all these generations, who have kept up the real tradition. But these have failed to win, for the purely spiritual religion up till now, any appreciable measure of general. The pseudo-Vaishnavas themselves also divided into an increasing number of hostile groups, each of which followed a novel inspiration, some of them taking to grossly immoral practices which they were not ashamed to give out as the religion taught by Sri Caitanya. The history of these tragic occurrences will be told in the concluding chapters of this narrative. The preponderance of the pseudo-forms of the religion has, however, secured their deserved banishment from the society of the cultured classes, and in consequence of this, the real tradition itself has tended to fall into utter neglect and is regarded with mistrust even by the orthodox Hindu society at the instigation of the Smarta priests. The pseudo-cults, that usurped the name of the religion of love, were invaded by all those evils of the older atheistical creeds which Sri Caitanya wishes to put down. The descendants of the old associates and followers of Sri Caitanya set themselves up as hereditary teachers of the pseudo-religion, which proved to them the means of eking out a miserable livelihood by exploitation of the credulity of the lowest classes and the most immoral sections of the people. The reader may for the present accept this as a moderate statement of the evils that have made us forget the teaching of Sri Caitanya, in order to be able to understand why his religion in course of time ceased to prevail in the upper ranks of society and was allowed to be substituted by wretched counterfeits to suit the whims and wickedness of designing quacks and knaves who earn their living by pandering to the worst vices of the dregs of society, claiming exemption from even the ordinary salutary checks of communities obeying the rules of the old civilization of the country. It is this which has made the identification of the old geographical sites a matter of hostile interest to the professional Goswamis even of this day and their misguided followers. When the old town was being deserted, the shrines and the holy forms, vigrahas, were taken by their migrating proprietors to the new sites. And, as the cultured society took little interest in the matter, the old sites quickly passed out of the memory of the nation. But with the revival of interest in the religion of Sri Caitanya among the cultured classes within the last 50 years or so, there also arose a natural desire to find out the old sites connected with Sri Caitanya. neither has it been really difficult to discover them with the help of the old books. The actual site of the home of Sri Jagannath Misra, which had escaped the general havoc wrought by the Bhagirathi, has been settled on the testimony of Vaishnava author, supplemented by the help of the actual knowledge of the most revered Vaishnava saints. The process by which the old sites have been identified is the same as that by which at the time of Sri Caitanya the holy sites of Sri Vrindavan were identified and made known. For the proper identification of a spiritual site, the testimony of the pure Vaishnavas is, spiritually speaking, the one thing needful, as they alone are privileged to recognize the site. Geographical and historical considerations by themselves are extraneous and can only be ancillary to the spiritual method. Sri Mupurdam, so identified, is situated geographically to the east of the river Bhagirathi, nearly opposite the present town of Nadia, which is located on the western bank of the river, identifiable with Old Kaladwap, one of the 9 islands forming Old Nabadwap. The name Antardwap, changed into Atopar, Vibhakti Ratnakar, persists to the present day and includes Sri Mupur, which still maintains its name unchanged. The river has constantly shifted its course up to quite recent times. The oldest maps enable us to follow the changes only as far back as 1763 AD. We have to rely exclusively on the testimony of the old writers for avoiding mistaken identification that is being attempted by interested parties by availing the shiftings of the location of the places during the 276 years that elapsed between the appearance of Sri Caitanya and the publication of Major Reynolds' Atlas. But tradition had always pointed to those deserted parts as the site of the old city. Of this fact we possess reliable and continuous testimony. The method, that appears to us on the whole to be best for the purpose of describing the place, is to follow the old writers, taking help of such light as is afforded by recent investigations for the purpose of understanding their statements. It is not our purpose to enter at this place into the details of any recent evidence for which the reader is referred to the investigations of Thakur Bhaktivinod, which have been summarized in different publications and which have formed the basis of subsequent inquiries regarding the real position of the old sites. Sri Mupur, which has escaped the widespread destruction that was apparently caused by sudden changes of the course of Bhagirathi from a very early period, is distinguishable from the adjoining lower alluvial plain by its elevation and older soil of adhesive clay. A modern village occupying a part of the site of Mupur is inhabited by a number of Mohammedan families who began to settle on this old site, which appears in course of time to have been totally deserted, from the year 1785. This is traceable. The actual site of the Yogapitha, the home of Sri Jagannatha Misra, was identified by the famous Saint Chaitanyadas Babaji about 80 years ago. It appears that the actual site was known as such to the few Vaishnavas who cared to be informed about it and had also been visited by them for their devotional purposes. The place was noted by the inhabitants of adjoining villages for alleged peculiarities. They maintain to this day that the place used to be always overgrown with sacred tulasi, for which reason people had instinctively desisted from any act of defilement or occupation for the purpose of erecting any private dwelling. This reverence towards the site, which is displayed by the Mohammedan residents in occupation of the adjoining plots, indeed, point to a definite conclusion. The row of high mounds, that are now crowned by a number of substantial buildings erected by the piety of Vaishnava since the rediscovery of the old sites, had never before been occupied by the villagers on their own account, who had always regarded with a sort of sacred awe those sites which were collectively known as the Vaishnava settlement, Vairagi Danga. There are many current stories of miraculous occurrences connected with the sites. But the most startling miracle of all is the fact that the persistent local tales are now found to be confirmed in their details by the topographical description of the old writers. For example, we read in the Bhakti Ratnakar that the courtyard of Sribas Pundit, where Sri Caitanya inaugurated his own distinctive form of worship, viz. the congregational curtain of Hari, and where, in the early days of his preaching, Sri Caitanya used to chant daily the curtain all through the nights in the company of his close associates, was situated 100 danas, 200 yards, to the north of the house of God. A plot of land, adjoining the site of the house of Jagannath Misra, finally and definitely identified by Sri Jagannath Das Babaji and easily recognizable by the evidence of local tradition, still bears the name of Kolabangar Dangai. The mound where the Kalai Mridanga was broken, which event, according to Sri Caitanya Bhagavata, the biography of Sri Caitanya by a contemporary, took place in a locality close to the yard of Sribas. The site is found to have continued to bear this name from the time when the call of the offending townsman, who persisted in playing on the mridanga for accompanying the chant, was broken by Chand Kazi for arresting the further progress of the movement, as described in that work. The tomb of Chand Kazi himself, who afterwards turned into a staunch supporter of Sri Caitanya, still exists at a place, the situation of which perfectly tallies with the topography of the books. It has, therefore, been possible on the testimony of such excellent corroborative evidence to identify many of the old sites and even the actual location of the houses of the prominent persons connected with the activities of Sri Caitanya in Old Nabadwip. Antardwip, which formed the heart of the old straggling city, was situated at the time of Sri Caitanya on the eastern bank of the Bhagirathi, whose current then flowed under the city. The old bank of the river is identifiable with the help of the old topography. The following old sites have been traced up until now in the above manner. 1. The House of God, Bhagavad Griham, i.e., the Yogapitha or house of Sri Jagannath Misra, father of Sri Caitanya. 2. The house of Sri Bas Pundit, in whose yard the Kirtana was first regularly sung in company. 3. The house of Sri Advatarya, the meeting place of the Vaishnavas in the early days of the movement. 4. The house of Sri Chandraskaracharya, in which Sri Caitanya acted the part of Sri Rukmini in a dramatic performance staged by his associates. 5. The tomb of Chand Kazi, which is shaded by a marvelous champaka tree reputed to be over 400 years old. 6. The old bank of the Bhagirathi, marked by its 4 prominent bathing ghats, viz. A. The Ghat of Old Siva, B. Gauranga Zone Ghat, C. Madai's Ghat, and D. Barakona Ghat, all of which possess famous associations. 7. The shrines of Old Siva and of Proramaya. All these, with the exception of 5, belong to the village that still bears the name of Mupur. Close to the tomb of Chand Kazi is the site of Sridhar's house. The house of Chandraskar is situated on Balal's tank, which bears the name of the famous independent Hindu king of Bengal, whose successor Lakshmana Sena permanently removed the capital from Gauda near Malda to the old town of Nabadwip. The mound of Balal, situate within a short distance of Sri Caitanya Math, is regarded locally as marking the site of the palace of the Sena kings, which was shunned by all persons after its desecration by the first Mohammedan conquerors of Bengal. The residence of Sri Nilambra Chakravarti, father of Sri Chaitanya's mother Sri Sachi Devi, was in the quarter of the town where the Qazi lived, which is the same as present Baymanpukar, identical with Bilpukar of the chroniclers. We shall, therefore, follow the order of the sites that was observed by pious devotees who performed the circumambulation of the holy Nabadwipam as described by the old writers, in offering a brief account of the surroundings of Sri Mupur that are associated with the early career of Sri Caitanya. Antardwip, literally, the central island, within which Sri Mupur is situated, forms the first of the 9 islands and the starting point of the circumambulators. The more famous of the recognizable old sites of Antardwip, Atopur, have already been noticed above. Simantadwip is the next island that is reached by the pilgrim. Its present name is Simulia, situated to the north of Sri Mupur. Sardanga, close to Simulia, contains an old shrine of Sri Jagannatha Deva. Sandanga, Vivapushkrini, the tract known as Medharkar, etc., lie close together. The house of Sachi Devi's father, as already stated, was situated near Bilpukar. The third of the islands is Gadrumadwip, modern Gadagatha, to the south and east of Sri Mupur. Close to it is Suvarna Bihar with very ancient associations. Other old places of this locality are Hriharakshtra, which contains the Mount Surya, Brahma, Indra and other gods, and Divapali with an old temple of Sri Nrisinga. This island contains the Bajan Kutter, cottage of devotional practice, and Samadhi, resting place, of Thakar Bhaktivinod. The fourth island is Madhyadwip, Majida, situated to the south of Sri Mupur. It contains the mounds of the 7 rishis, a channel bearing the name of Gomati, the adjoining wooded tract being known as Misharanya, Sri Brahman Puskaras, Bayman Pokhara, Upchahata, Hatdanga and other sites of pious association. The fifth of the islands is Kaladwip, the modern town of Nadia, to the west-south, west of Sri Mupur. At the time of Sri Caitanya, Kaladwip or Kulia was separated from Nadia, the home of Sri Caitanya, only by the intervening main channel of the Bhagirathi. It is called the place of expiation in reference to the incidents connected with Gopal Chapel and Devananda Pandit, whose offences were forgiven by Sri Caitanya at Kulia. It is sometimes designated as the High Bank of Kulia and is connected by old writers with very ancient events. Close to it is Samudragar. The sixth island is Ratudwip, southwest of Kaladwip. In it is situated the village of Champahati, which was formerly a grove of champaka trees. The old shrine of Sri Gadadhar erected by Dvija Bainanath, one of the principal associates of Sri Chaitanya, still exists at Champahati. It was also the residence of the famous poet Jayadeva of the time of King Lakshmana Sena. The seventh island was anciently called Janudwap, modern Janagar, to the north of Rudwap. Close to it is Vidyanagar, where the academy of the famous Vasudeva Sarvabhauma was situated. Madadrumadwap is the eighth island to the north of Janudwap. Here is the village of Mamgaki, the birthplace of Thakur Brindabandhas, author of Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, the contemporary, systematic account of the career of Sri Chaitanya written in Bengali verse. At Mamgaki was located the paternal residence of Sri Maulini Devi, spouse of Sribas Pundit. Close to the birth site of Thakur Brindabandhas is the shrine of Sri Madan Gopala installed by Sri Vasudeva Datta Thakur, brother of Sri Mukunda Datta Thakur of Chattagram, the close associate of Sri Chaitanya. This shrine contains also the holy form, Vigraha, installed by Saranga Murari Thakur, the associate of Sri Chaitanya. The ninth island is Rudradwap northeast of Madadrumadwap. These 9 islands constitute the circle of Sridhamnabadwap, the circumference of which is given as 32 miles. Srimapur and the adjoining places are at the present day, in their outward appearance, very different from the old town of Nabadwap at the time of Sri Chaitanya. The present town of Nadia, which is not a very beautiful place except its shrines, is now the only part of the city of the 9 islands that bears anything approaching an urban appearance, judged even by the modest standard of a Bengal town. The other parts are almost purely rural and are mostly overgrown with jungle. The numerous small channels of the Bhagirathi, which abound about this point, impart a charming openness to the landscape and salubrious freshness to the soft rural breezes that love to haunt the silent places of practices of the only absolute pure faith. The main stream of the sacred Bhagirathi, which is here swelled to noble proportion by the tribute of the great body of sweet and pure water that is poured into it just below Srimapur by the Jalangi, forms now, as it did also at the time of Sri Chaitanya, the central feature of the countryside. But the main current of the Bhagirathi in old time flowed past the landing places of the old populous city. The riverside of the old city is partly traceable. The bank was washed away probably by a sudden shifting of the course of the river due to a great earthquake that fearfully damaged the place in 1515 AD, shortly after Sri Chaitanya had renounced home and family, but the splendors of the old city lingered long in the memory of the inhabitants. Thakur Brindabandhas, who wrote his divine narrative, Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, not long after the disappearance of the Supreme Lord, gives the following description of the old town to his contemporaries who could also confirm his eulogies. There was not another town in the world, says Thakur Brindabandhas, like Nabadwap where Sri Chaitanya was born. The divine architect must have known beforehand his impending advent and had accordingly lavished with a prodigal hand all his bounty to make of Nabadwap the ideal place that it was. Who could describe the opulence of Nabadwap? Every single bathing ghat was thronged by 100,000 bathers. Each caste resident in Nabadwap had lakhs of members of every age. All the people were highly skilled in their respective occupations by the grace of the goddess of learning. All of them boasted of being masters in their line, and mere boys contended with the Brahmana teachers in scholastic disputations. People from various countries flocked to Nabadwap. One could obtain the real taste of learning only by studying at Nabadwap. The great fame of its learning drew countless students who were taught by an incredibly large number of the most erudite teachers. This atmosphere of learning was also one of great happiness by the kind glance of the goddess of wealth. But the spiritual condition of the town, in which we are specially interested, was not encouraging. This is what the same competent observer has to say on the subject. The people were blessed with the choicest favors of the goddesses of learning and wealth. In these respects they had attained the summit of their desire. There was only one drawback. The time of all people was wholly wasted in the enjoyments of secular pursuits. The world was destitute of devotion for Krishna and Rama, Baladeva. At this earliest stage of the Iron Age there came to prevail prematurely those worst practices that have been predicted by the scriptures about the far-off future of this age of evil. The people sat up whole nights at the songs of Mangalchandi, goddess of worldly blessing. This was the only practice of religion known to the people. There were a few who in their vanity worshipped the goddess Bishahari, healer of poison. Some lavished immense wealth on the making of grand idols. Wealth was squandered on the marriages of sons and daughters. The time of the people was passed in such vanities. The great Chakravartis and Bhattacharyas were wholly unaware of the significance of the great Shastras. By their teaching of the scriptures they earn for themselves and their hearers only entanglement in the toil spread by the pitiless hand of death. They never expounded the divine dispensation of the age in the shape of the Kirtana of Krishna. They spoke only of faults and never of the good qualities of anyone. There was a great number of arrogant recluses and ascetics whose mouths never uttered such a sound as the names of Hari. Those persons, who were most reputed for their piety, used to utter the names of Govinda and Pundrakaksha only at their baths. Even those who professed to teach the Gita and the Bhagavatam never employed their tongues to the task of explaining the principles of devotion to Godhead. No one could be persuaded even by entreaty to take the name of Krishna. Everyone harped ad nauseam on the merits of learning and social rank. There was one notable exception to the above rule. Sri Advaita, who lived at Nadia, was most highly respected for his unrivaled learning, his high birth and honored position in society. He was an eminent professor of the scriptures and excelled in expounding the true spiritual practice and principle. He was equal to the great Sankara Siva himself in expounding the subject of devotion to Krishna. He was equally well versed in all branches of the scriptures, and, in teaching them, he was always careful to explain that devotion to the feet of Krishna was the essence of all the scriptures. He was always engaged in worshipping Krishna with the greatest ardor, in the simplest and purest manner, by the offering of sprays of the holy Tulasi, dearly loved of Krishna, steeped in the sacred water of the Ganges. He often gave vent to deep ejaculations of sorrow resembling the rumbling of thunder and impregnated with the fiery energy of Krishna, which, passing beyond the limits of this universe, reverberated in the holy realm of Vaikuntha. Sri Advaita was the leader of a small band of sincere devotees who were at this time settled in Nabadwip. These Vaishnavas were opposed by atheists, especially on account of their practice of frequently uttering the name of Hari with a loud voice. This practice, together with their theistic views, was sufficient to mark them out as the legitimate objects of their invectives and ridicule, from which they could not be effectively shielded even by the great influence of Sri Advaita himself, who was regarded with respect and awe all over Nadia. The reason for such hostility were many, the foremost being that the Vaishnavas eschewed all worldly pleasures and enjoyments, which was regarded as a deprecation of the life of Epicurean ease that was fashionable in all ranks of the then society. There was no want of aggressive Epicureans in that age also who openly condemned all pretensions to a life that was in every way above animality. They wrote scurrilous ballads against the Vaishnavas and sang them in the streets. The ascetic, the chaste woman, no less than others so ran these effusions, will go the way of all the flesh. He alone can be said to have done good deeds in his previous birth, who rides the dola and the horse and is preceded and followed by scores of running footmen. Much as your holiness cries in the mood of devotion, yet it does not cancel your holiness's sorrows of poverty. Your holiness never ceases to call upon the name of Hari with a very loud voice. It may surely anger the Lord to be addressed by shouts. The frank realism of these 15th century Bengali followers of Charvaka cannot be outdone by their most up-to-date successors of the present day. This was almost the general attitude of the citizens of a profligate town devoid of all taste for anything higher than bodily enjoyments of a refined character engendered by their engrossing secular studies and urban pursuits. There was another class of objectors who also ridiculed the mode of Kirtana with a loud voice. The ground for their objection was, however, different from that of the refined Epicureans. I myself, such were the ideas of these people, am the Brahman who is devoid of all the qualities. Why then do they make any such distinction as that between servant and master? These men were the worst enemies of the Vaishnavas. There were also many persons who looked upon the Vaishnavas as designing worldly people who took to begging to earn their livelihood by that easy method, for sheer idleness. We frequently hear the complaint that religion suffers degradation by scarcity of people who really led the religious life. It is supposed that if religion is freed from the clutches of these people who have so long monopolized it for their profit and pleasure and have degraded it by their foul lives, people in general would voluntarily follow the lead of truly devout persons. If only the preachers of religion, say these open atheists, led truly spiritual lives themselves, their example would prove irresistible in winning everybody to spiritual living. But the opposite of this is what almost invariably happens in this world. The sincere devotees are always ridiculed and persecuted by the people. This is also exactly as was likely in the circumstances. Those who are steeped in worldliness have a spontaneous dislike for persons who openly profess principles and follow a mode of life that are in essential contradiction to theirs. The conduct of the devotees is always regarded by worldly people, who have no inclination for listening to the unpalatable truth, as both foolish and mischievous. Therefore, instead of following the example of such persons, the worldlings always look upon the pure souls as enemies of every useful institution and set themselves in vindictive opposition to their activities. To what ferocious persecution the bona fide Vaishnavas have been subjected at the hands of their opponents from time to time is not sufficiently well known, although it forms the most pathetic and the most shameful chapter of the history of India. Sri Caitanya says, "It is our only duty always to chant the Kirtana of Hari with humility greater than that of the blade of grass, with greater endurance than that of the tree, giving all due honor to others without desiring any honor for ourselves. But nothing can make amends, in the eyes of worldly people, for the crime of chanting the name of Hari or proclaiming the unvarnished truth in and out of season and at all time with body, mind and speech as required by the teaching of all the scripture embodied in the institution of the whole time Kirtana of the Absolute." We have already described in a preceding chapter the state of religious opinion in the country of the time of Sri Caitanya. There was no lack of unspiritual doctrines and practices upheld by ancient philosophical systems, most of which were mere apologies or even justifications of the ordinary ungodly practices of the misguided jivas of this world. The system that was in most vogue among the pandits of Nabadwip at this period and has been fashionable ever since is the atheistical system of Nabiyaniya. The other atheistical systems of philosophy were also assiduously taught in the schools of Nabadwip. We learn that scholars even from Midila, Turhud, came to Nabadwip to study the new logic. Sannyasins and learned professors from Benares and all parts of North India came to Nabadwip for the study of Vedanta. We also read of students coming to Nabadwip even from distant Kanchi and the southernmost part of the country. These materialistic studies had acquired such preponderance at that period that scholarship and ungodliness came to be regarded as necessarily identical. The masses sang the songs of Mangalchandi and considered the endeavor for increasing the means of worldly enjoyment as the ideal of religion. The common people, and especially the wealthy trading communities, performed with great eclat the worship of Mangalchandi and, by subsidizing the Brahmana pandits with liberal pecuniary gifts, were enabled to buy their subservient approval of those unscriptural practices. Much money was recklessly squandered on the short-lived idols and no less on the exhibition of pantomime dolls, which was an invariable and costly item of expense on all festive occasions. There were very few permanent holy vigrahas in Bengal at that time. The worship of the permanent holy vigraha became a tradition in Bengal only subsequent to the advent of Sri Caitanya and as the effect of his teachings. Temporary images were the only objects of worship. Those images were immersed in water after the festivity in their honor was concluded, on the wrong assumption that the form of Godhead is a material and temporary entity. This posture of affairs filled the devotees with grief and despair. No one served Godhead, no one ever talked about him, or took his holy name, or could be persuaded to listen to any discourse about him. This was the blighted waste glutted with every form of luxury aggravated by the strenuous pursuit of worldly knowledge, which evoked the tenderest solicitude of that small band of pure souls and impelled them to adopt every method that could be devised for rousing the deluded people to a sense of their eternal duty and thereby saving them from their impending terrible doom. But all their efforts for the amelioration of the spiritual condition of the people were misunderstood and responded to by the bitterest invectives, ridicule and cruel persecution. Yet those servants of Godhead did not lose their faith nor relax their efforts, although their very food did not taste in their mouths at the sight of the miseries of their kindred. The Bhagavatas applied themselves to their devotions in the forms of the worship of Krishna, discourse about Krishna, and bathing in the holy stream of the Ganges. And all of them incessantly blessed the world. May Krishna soon bestow his mercy on all. Chapter E. Family and Elders. The advent of Sri Caitanya was preceded by the appearance of a numerous body of pure devotees in different parts of the country who joined him at Nabadwip in due course and became incorporated in his activities. This galaxy of the stars of the first magnitude occupies the foreground of the picture that it is our purpose to offer. Sri Caitanya is unintelligible without intimate knowledge of the doings of his associates. He is expressed in the only intelligible form in the lives of his associates. He is expressed in the only intelligible form in the lives of his bona fide devotees. These devotees were not so many imitators of Sri Caitanya. Each of them has a great, living, individual personality. Each serves Sri Chaitanya in his own way and helps to demonstrate the quality of unbounded Catholicity and endless variety of manifestation in individual personalities of our only eternal function. The conduct of these devotees is even more instructive than the transcendental activities of Sri Chaitanya himself, whom it was the function of these great souls to express by serving the absolute truth identical with the personality of Sri Chaitanya under every form of circumstance and every manner of disposition, by the method of incorporated, subordinate service. The Vaishnava authors always offer the esoteric view of those events. When Godhead himself comes down into this world, he does not come unattended by his eternal associates and divine paraphernalia. They accompany him to this world. The transcendental realm of the White Island is the eternal divine abode of Sri Chaitanya, who is identical with Sri Krishna and presents the divinity's own benevolent nature dominating over all other divine qualities. The Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya dwells in the White Island, as does Krishna Chandra in Braja, with all his elders, kindred, associates and complete entourage. When Sri Chaitanya deigns to come down into this world, he comes in his fullness, with all his elders, associates, servitors and realm. His advent is, therefore, preceded by the appearance of his elders. All these are a part and parcel of himself and are in fact the extension of his own divine self. It is by their reciprocal means that the Lord manifests his own full personality. What the Lord is in his super-manifest nature cannot and need not be known to anyone except himself. Others need know the Lord only to the fullest extent and in the fullest manner in which he chooses to manifest himself to them individually. By the manifestation of Godhead to the individual soul, the latter is fully satisfied and, as a matter of fact, such an individual does not desire, nor does he think it necessary to know anything more, not merely for the time being but for all time. The Jiva to whom Godhead reveals himself sees the same divine manifestation everywhere and always, in his infinity of aspects. His cherished divinity is to him verily an endless ocean of perfect and exquisite bliss, free from every species of unwholesomeness, imperatively requiring his perennial loving service by his perpetual manifestations. The appearance of the Lord is for the purpose of making his devotees happy by affording them the sight of himself. The establishment of religion and the destruction of demons who appear as the enemies of Godhead do not require the personal appearance of Supreme Godhead Sri Krishna himself. These functions can be, and as a matter of fact are ordinarily, performed by the Vishnu avatars, or sometimes even by the favored among the pure Jivas, by his command. The establishment of the Sankirtana of Krishna, which is the divine dispensation of this Kali age, is effected by the Avatara for the age, and it would not be necessary for Godhead to come down into this world for this purpose alone. But there is a function which cannot be delegated, viz., that of pleasing the devotees. Love for himself can neither be conferred nor be satisfied by anything short of himself. It was for the purpose of bestowing on fallen Jivas love for himself in the perfect form that is found only in Goloka that Sri Krishna, wearing the devotional mood and grace of Sri Radhika, appeared in this world in his eternal identical form of Sri Krishna Chaitanya, with all his associates, elders and servitors eternally manifest in the White Island, the realm of Krishna's boundless and causeless mercy. In Braja, Sri Radhika sets the model for the highest service of Krishna. In the White Island it is Sri Krishna himself who performs the function of teaching all individual souls how Sri Radhika serves Sri Krishna in Braja, by putting on Sri Radhika's grace and devotion in order to enable himself to serve Sri Krishna after the manner of Sri Radhika in her highest mood, viz., during her separation from Sri Krishna. The service that is rendered by Sri Radhika manifests itself in this world in Braja at the close of the Dvapara age. But in its direct manifestation it is not at all understood by mortals. It is only the Lord himself who can bestow this perfect loving devotion to himself even on souls that are averse to him on principle and thereby enable them to realize the true meaning of such pure devotion. This explanation of the real purpose of the advent of Sri Chaitanya is fully corroborated by the scriptures and by the activities of Sri Chaitanya himself. When Godhead himself appears in this world, all his secondary manifestations automatically merge in him. It was in this wise that there were born among men, by the command of Godhead, in advance of his own appearance, the kindreds, associates and servitors of the Lord. Sri Ananta, Siva, Brahma, the Rishis and all the relations and associates of every divine avatar were born and their prototypes. Some of them appeared in Nabadwip, some in Chattagram, Srihata, some were born in Rar, in Odra, and the West. The devotees descending into this world from their transcendental realm appeared in various places and, coming up subsequently to Nabadwip, were there joined together around the person of the Lord. All the Vaishnavas were born in Nabadwip, except a few who appeared elsewhere. The elders who were first to appear were Sri Sachi, Sri Jagannath, Sri Madhabendrapuri, Sri Keshava Bharati, Sri Asvarapuri, Sri Advtakriya, Sri Pundrik Vidyanidhi, Sri Thakar Haridas, Sri Upendra Misra, father of Sri Jagannath Misra, with his 7 sons, Sri Nilambra Chakravarti, father of Sri Sachi Devi, Sri Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Gangadas Pandit, Sri Murari Gupta, Sri Mukunda and others. Our records show that a certain Brahmana of western India, bearing the name of Sri Madhukar Misra, a devotee of Sri Narayana, for some unknown reason, came to Sylhet and settled there. Sri Upendra Misra was the second son of Sri Madhukar Misra. Sri Upendra Misra was a Vaishnava, a great scholar, wealthy and possessed of an abundance of good qualities. Sri Upendra Misra was the father of 7 sons: 1. Kamsari, 2. Paramananda, 3. Jagannath, 4. Sarbswar, 5. Padmanabh, 6. Janardhan, and 7. Trilokanath. Sri Jagannath Misra, one of the 7 sons of Sri Upendra Misra, migrated from Sylhet to Nabadwip, the emporium of all learning of the age. The title of Sri Jagannath Misra, earned by his Shastric scholarship, was Purandara. At Nabadwip, Sri Purandara Misra espoused Sri Sachi Devi, the eldest daughter of Sri Nilambra Chakravarti, with the intention of dwelling in the neighborhood of the sacred stream of the Bhagirathi that has issued from the feet of Vishnu, in the company of highborn Sri Sachi Devi, who was the embodiment of devotion to Vishnu. Pure-hearted magnanimous Purandara Misra settled in Srimupur in the central island of the city of 9 islands. Sri Chandraskaracharya was the maternal uncle mother's sister's husband of Sri Chaitanya. Sri Murari Gupta, the author of Sri Chaitanya Charit, belonging to a Vaidya family of Sylhet, had migrated to Nabadwip. He was senior in years to Sri Chaitanya. Sri Pundrik Vidyanidhi, also known as Premanidhi and Agriyanidhi, had his paternal home in the village of Methala about 14 miles to the north of the town of Chittagong, where his sacred seat still exists. His partner's name was Ratnavati. His father was Vanswar, or Suklambar, Bhatta, and his mother's name was Ganga Devi. He was the disciple of Sri Madhabendrapuri and was himself accepted as his guru by Sri Gadadhar Pandit Goswami. Sri Chaitanya called Pundrik Vidyanidhi father and bestowed on him the name of Premanidhi, indicative of servitorship of Godhead. Sribas and his younger brother Sri Rama left their home at Srimupur and removed to Kumarhata after Sri Chaitanya's renunciation of the world. Sri Nityananda Prabhu, the associated facsimile of Sri Chaitanya, made his appearance in the village of Ekchakra in the country of Rar, not far from Malarpur station of the EI railway, within the modern district of Birbhum. Hadai Pandit or Hadai Aha, the father of Nityananda, was a good Brahmana from Mithila, resembling Vasudeva in the immaculate purity of his nature. The name of the wife of Hadai Pandit was Padmavati. Nityananda made his appearance in this world on the Tithi which is ever hallowed by his birth, that corresponds to the 13th day of the bright fortnight of the month of Mad. As a child, Nityananda startled all the neighbors by being constantly occupied in the company of his associates in rehearsing the events of the avatars of Vishnu. The details of these childish pastime have been reverentially preserved. Their nature may be briefly indicated. He made his playmates form themselves into the assembly of gods. One of the boys, representing the earth, having complained to it of her unbearable sufferings under the crushing weight of iniquities, those children who acted as members of the assembly of gods repaired to the bank of the adjoining river and there prayed to the Lord who rests in the ocean of milk. One of the boys, hid behind the tree, gives this reply of Godhead to their prayer: "I will soon be born in the home of Vasudeva at Mathura." Sometimes personating the divine avatar of the dwarf, Nityananda affected to deliver Bali. On another occasion he would fall into a swoon acting the part of Lakshmana in the Leela of Godhead's avatar as Sri Ramachandra hit by the powerful dart of Indrajit. Then one of the boys, acting the part of Hanuman, hastened to procure the required curative herb from the Gandhamadana mount and by that means effected his recovery. Such pastimes of the little boy amazed all beholders who could not account for this extraordinary conduct of the little child. 12 years were passed in these pleasant activities under the roof of his parents. Nityananda set out on his long travel to all places of pilgrimage at the age of 12. The incident that immediately led to this long pilgrimage is thus stated. A certain sannyasin became a chance guest at the house of Hadai Pandit. He begged of Hadai Pandit to give Nityananda to him. And, in order not to transgress against the rule laid down by the Shastras, Hadai Pandit found himself obliged, against his own wish, to hand to the sannyasin the darling of his heart who was much more to him than even his own life. The grief of the parents, in being thus parted for good from their child of 12, knew no bounds. The nature of the renunciation of the world for the sake of Godhead must on no account be confounded with renunciation for any other purpose, which latter is an unpardonable and clear dereliction of one's duty. The renunciation exhibited by Godhead and his devotees redounds to the good of the whole world, and, most of all, of those very persons who appear, to the superficial observer, to be the greatest sufferers by their abandonment. Lord Nityananda, after thus leaving his parental home, travelled to all the tirthas in company of the sannyasin till the 20th year of his age. The places he thus visited include Bakraswar, Vaidyanath, Gaya, Kasi, Prag, Mathura, Brindabana, Hastinapur, Dwaraka, Siddhapura, Matsyatirtha, Siva, Kanchi, Vishnu Kanchi, Kurukshetra, Bindusarabar, Pravasa, Sudrasantirtha, Tritakap, Vishala, Brahmatirtha, Chakratirtha, Pratishrota, Misharanya, Ayodhya, Sringaharpur, Kausiki, Pulastasrama, Gomati, Gandaki, Mahendragiri, Haridwar, Godavari, Benvatirtha, Sri Parbata, Sri Ranganatha, Harikstra, Rishabdha Parbata, Kritamala, Madura, Tamraparni, Malaya Parbata, Badari Kasrama, Gokarna, Surpraka, Kanyakanagara, Nirbindha and all the countless holy sites. He journeyed to all those places in order to sanctify them by his visit. At the conclusion of this long pilgrimage, Nityananda enacted the Leela of obtaining the only reward of pilgrimage in the shape of attainment of the privilege of the companionship of the true devotee, inasmuch as he now joined Sri Madhavendra Puri, the first shoot of the purpose tree of loving devotion, from whom he accepted his initiation into spiritual life, or, according to some, he accepted his initiation from Sri Lakshmipati, the guru of Sri Madhavendra Puri. The meeting with his guru is thus described by Sri Ganasyam Thakur, the writer of Bhakti Ratnakar. Lakshmipati, so famous in the school of Madhya, the owner of all good qualities, most dear to the Lord of Sri Lakshmi Devi, partook of his meal obtained by begging, interspersed with Krishna talk, at the house of that Brahmana. Nityananda in the form of Balarama showed himself to Lakshmipati under the guise of a dream. A certain Brahmana boy has come to this village in the garb of a super ascetic. He will be your disciple. Make him your disciple by means of this mantram, and he spoke the mantram into his ear. Nityananda on meeting him repeatedly said to the sannyasin, "Do thou deliver me by initiation by the mantram." After initiation, Nityananda was given the Brahmachari's name of Svarup and has accordingly been sometimes called Nityananda Svarup both by Sri Brindabandas Thakur as well as by Srila Kavira Goswami. Sri Nityananda subsequently made his way to Nabadwap where he joined Sri Caitanya. Thakur Haridas made his appearance in this world in about the year 1451 AD, 1372 SH, 35 years before the advent of Sri Caitanya, in the village of Budhan in the district of Jessore. He came of a Mohammedan family and in some manner, of which we do not possess any trustworthy record, obtained very early in life the mercy of a Vaishnava who initiated him into the religion of all souls. He, thereupon, left his parents' house and his kin, and came to Benapole where he made a small hut and lived therein. His method of worship consisted in repeating, constantly and with a loud voice, the holy Mahamantram of the 16 names of Godhead. He recited the Mahamantram 3 lakhs of times every day. For this purpose he cut himself off completely from every form of worldly association. It was not long, however, before his practice found a malicious opponent in a local landholder of a most villainous character, of the name of Ramachandra Khan. Ramachandra Khan was as foolish as he was wicked and was incited to adopt the infamous method described below by the representations of a fanatical section of the Hindu residents of the locality who felt themselves scandalized by a Mohammedan presuming to adopt their language in taking the name of Godhead in the manner that could pierce even the ear holes of such a great personage as Ramachandra Khan. Ramachandra Khan did not believe that a person in the full bloom of early youth could have really no attachment for woman. He accordingly deputed a shameless harlot of great beauty, whom he subsidized for the purpose, to employ her seductive arts to compass the ruin of the young devotee. This abandoned woman continued to offer herself regularly at the solitary hut of devotion of Thakur Haridas for 3 successive nights. She was kept waiting for the whole night by Thakur Haridas by the assurance that he would attend to her request after the utterance of the quota of the names that he was under obligation to take daily was completed. Towards the close of the 3rd night, that harlot, whose mind had been completely changed by listening to the holy name of Godhead from the lips of the great saint, who was so completely unmindful of those irresistible charms of a young woman that are the cause of ruin of so many so-called rishis of all ages and conditions, fell prostrate at the feet of Thakur Haridas and, with a contrite and chastened heart, implored him to enable her to worship Godhead in the pure manner that he himself did. The woman opened her heart frankly to Thakur Haridas and told him all about the infernal conspiracy and also of her own past life, which had been utterly sinful. Haridas said to her that she was fit to take the holy name of Godhead, and he accordingly initiated her into the life of the pure service of Krishna. Haridas then advised her to give away all her treasure to the pious Brahmanas and devote herself to the worship of Krishna by constantly uttering his name, living apart from all other people in the solitary hut which he had built for his own worship. Thereupon, bestowing his own hut on that woman, Thakur Haridas left Benapole for good. That harlot became thenceforward a most renowned devotee of Krishna. From Benapole, Thakur Haridas proceeded to Chandpur eastward of Saptagrama, the residence of the father of the future Raghunath Das Goswami, who was at this time a little boy. The name of Raghunath's father was Gobardhan Mazumdar. Hiranya was the elder brother of Gobardhan. They were employed under Sultan Hussain Shah to collect the revenues of Saptagrama, which totaled 20 lakhs of rupees, of which 12 had to be remitted to the royal treasury, the collectors being entitled to retain for themselves the balance of 8 lakhs. They were consequently among the richest persons of that time. Thakur Haridas put up with Balaramakriya of Chandpur, who was the priest of Hiranya and Gobardhan. The boy Raghunath Das frequently visited Thakur Haridas. This was the cause of his obtaining the mercy of Sri Chaitanya later on. At the request of Balaramakriya, Thakur Haridas once presented himself at the gathering of Brahmanas in the halls of Hiranya and Gobardhan, who were patrons of Brahmanas and pious persons. The Thakur was well received by both brothers. Presently, evidently in view of the practice of the Thakur, the assembly began to praise the taking of the holy name, some maintaining that the name destroys sin, others contending that the name confers deliverance from the bondage of the world. Thakur Haridas said that those secondary results are effected by the dim reflection of the name. The effect of the name himself is to arouse love to the feet of Krishna. Emancipation is the trivial effect of the dim reflection of the name. A Brahmana by the name of Gopal Chakravarti, who was employed by Hiranya Mazumdar in connection with the remittance of revenues to Gauda and who happened to be present, felt greatly chagrined to hear these statements of Thakur Haridas and asked the assembly not to be led away by the ridiculous effusions of an impostor, acting the part of a sadhu to deceive ignorant people, by endorsing the view that emancipation, which is not attainable in crores of births on the path of knowledge of the Brahman, is gained by the mere dim glow of the name. This, he said, was impossible and intolerable. When Thakur Haridas, with great calmness, quoted the scriptures to show that emancipation, resulting from the dim glow of the name, is trivial and is not accepted by devotees even when it becomes available to them, the Brahmana's anger was so much inflamed by this exhibition of firmness that he shouted to Thakur Haridas that if he failed to prove from the scriptures that emancipation results from the dim glow of the name, was he prepared to have his nose cut off. The Thakur intimated his readiness to submit to the bet proposed, whereupon all the assembled people and especially Balaramakriya strongly condemned the outrageous conduct of Gopal, and all of them, including Hiranya and Gobardhan, begged the forgiveness of the Thakur for the insult that had been openly offered to him in their presence. Thakur Haridas observed that Gopal's anger was due to his ignorance of the scriptures and he was, therefore, not to blame. And saying this, he left the place, resuming the loud chant of the name of Krishna. It is recorded that for this offense Gopal Chakravarti was afflicted with the worst form of leprosy in the course of 3 days and his nose fell off in consequence, and that although the Thakur so readily forgave him, his offense was not pardoned by Godhead. From Chandpur, Thakur Haridas made his way to Santipur and presented himself at the house of Sri Advtakriya. The latter was very much encouraged by the appearance of Haridas and provided him with a suitable place for his devotional practices by finding out a cave in a retired part of the bank of the Ganges. Thakur Haridas lived in this cell and had his daily meal at the house of Advta with whom he could talk about Krishna. Haridas expressed his fear that the conduct of Advaita in feeding him daily with the most unreserved hospitality might bring social troubles to him, he being a Mohammedan by birth. Sri Advaita, in answer to this, formally offered to Thakur Haridas the meal cooked for the occasion of the anniversary of the Shraddha ceremony of his departed father that had to be given to the Brahmanas according to custom, with the remark that by feeding you, crores of Brahmanas are truly fed. It is said that the Thakur Haridas was tempted a second time by a woman while he was staying at the cave at Santipur, and that this time the woman was no less than Maya herself, the deluding power of Godhead, whose solicitation, which no jiva, from Brahma downwards, can resist, produced on Haridas the only effect of increasing still further his ardent devotion to the feet of Krishna. Devi sought and obtained the gift of the name of Krishna from Thakur Haridas in lieu of her effort to test the sincerity of the devotion of Haridas. From Santipur, Thakur Haridas made his way to the village of Fulia, which was the residence of a strong community of Brahmanas. Fulia is situated 3 miles to the east of Santipur. Thakur Haridas lived here in a cell on the bank of the Bhagirathi as at Santipur and chanted aloud the Mahamantram of 16 names of Godhead 3 lakhs of times every day. The Mohammedans who lived in the neighborhood were incited by the Brahmanas of Fulia to complain to the Qazi about the behavior of Haridas, which, they pointed out, was bound to produce a most undesirable effect on the prestige of the Mohammedan community and religion. The Qazi took this seriously and had Haridas brought to the presence of the governor for trial. He was at first treated with great respect and allowed to visit the prison as he desired to converse with the prisoners. The prisoners, who did not expect in their midst a saint who was treated with respect by the keepers, thought he might obtain their release from captivity. They accordingly pressed round him and begged him to intercede with the governor for their liberation. The Thakur in reply congratulated them on their captivity and wished that their state of bondage might be prolonged. This filled the prisoners with dismay. Haridas hastened to remove their mistake by explaining what he meant. He said that they were forcibly kept away from the pursuit of worldly objects in their state of captivity. This gave them a respite for the worship of Godhead. Because Godhead cannot be worshipped when one's mind is engrossed in the affairs of this world, they should avail themselves of this opportunity, so mercifully placed in their way, of turning their thoughts to Godhead, so that, having acquired the taste for such life, even after they were set free, they might continue to serve Godhead in the midst of the various temptations of the world. He did not really desire the prolongation of their state of captivity in the ordinary sense. When Thakur Haridas was produced before the governor for his trial, he was offered a good seat in the court and the governor pleaded, with every appearance of sincere goodwill, that he should revert to his own society, its customs and religion. Thakur Haridas replied, "A man follows the path that appears to him to be the best. This is the dispensation of providence. Under this law a man born in a high Brahmana family sometimes embraces the Mohammedan religion. And although he was born in a Mohammedan family, God has been merciful to him and has shown him the path of the highest good. This path he intends to follow. If such conduct appears to the governor to be deserving of punishment, he is prepared to undergo any consequences that it may involve." The governor then began to revile Vishnu and threatened to punish Thakur Haridas with severe whipping till he would be forced to give up the heinous course. Thakur Haridas simply replied, "Even if he is actually cut to pieces he would never for a moment cease to utter the name of Hari with his mouth." The governor, at the instance of the Qazi, now carried out his threat by ordering Thakur Haridas to be whipped in 22 marketplaces of Mulk. This barbarous order was duly executed. When Thakur Haridas appeared to be dead, the ruffians who had been employed to cudgel him tried to throw his body into the Ganges. It is said that they failed to lift the body with all their efforts. This frightened the governor and his aiders and abettors in this horrible sin. The governor now spoke kind words to Haridas. He was convinced that Haridas was a real holy man, and not a cheat as he had taken him to be. He was sorry for what he had done and even begged his forgiveness. He then ordered his men to liberate Haridas and assured him of immunity from all further molestation on his part, desiring him to do as he liked. Thakur Haridas returned to his cell at Fulia, undaunted by this terrible proof of the implacable vindictiveness of his opponents. On another day a snake charmer was giving a display of his art at the house of a wealthy resident of Fulia to the accompaniment of dance and music. Thakur Haridas happened to arrive on the spot and taking his stand on one side watched the performance, which was a representation of a feat of Sri Krishna, viz. the quelling of the serpent Kalya. Overpowered by the associations awakened in him by the sacred theme, Thakur Haridas fainted away and, when he was helped to regain his consciousness, himself joined in the dance, exhibiting all the external signs of the 8 Sattvika perturbations. The snake charmer stopped his performance and, with palms joined in the attitude of reverence standing motionless on one side, gazed with awe on the devotional activities of Thakur. This mood of Haridas was, however, soon over. And, after he had stopped, the snake charmer resumed his musical performance. Those present were so moved by the occurrence that they devoutly took the dust of the feet of Thakur. A Brahmana, who happened to be in the crowd and had watched the whole affair, thought of acquiring a cheap reputation for sanctity by imitating the Sattvika perturbations of Haridas that he had witnessed. He accordingly affected to swoon away and forthwith began to sing, dance, laugh and shiver in imitation of Thakur Haridas. The snake charmer now behaved in a most strange manner. He, who had been so quiet and respectful towards Thakur Haridas, suddenly fell upon the unlucky Brahmana with great fury and began to belabor him with a cudgel that he snatched from one of his men, in a most merciless fashion. That Brahmana, unable to bear the severe thrashing, took to his heels in a very short time. On being asked by the spectators the reason of his strange and violent conduct towards the Brahmana, the snake charmer replied that he had beat the Brahmana, because by his hypocritical exhibitions he was trying to bring into contempt the conduct of the revered Thakur Haridas. Another Brahmana fully opposed the practice of chanting loudly the name of Hari by Haridas on the ground that it was against the scriptures. He denied that Haridas, who was born of a Mohammedan family, had any right to dabble in the philosophy and religion of the Hindus. That this very fact of a Mohammedan posing as a teacher of the scriptures of the Hindus portended the appearance, long before its appointed time, of the worst period of the age of evil. This impostor has the effrontery of procuring the best food by begging from door to door, presuming to teach the Shastras to respectable people. If his explanation regarding chanting of the name of Hari with a loud voice is not found in the scriptures, his nose ought to be cut off. Accosted by the infuriated Brahmana in the above fashion, Thakur Haridas with a smile left the place to chant loudly the name of Hari. That Brahmana also met with the condign punishment of his offense by being smitten with the smallpox in the course of a few days that cost him his nose. Thakur Haridas now made his way to Navadvip and there joined the congregation of the small group of Vaishnavas that was gradually forming round the figures of Sri Advaita, who had settled there as a teacher with his own academy, Tal, and Sribas Pandit, who lived close to the academy of Sri Advaita. At this time Thakur Haridas constantly travelled to different parts of the country with the object of preaching the Kirtana of Hari to the people. Shortly after his arrival at Navadvip, he joined Sri Caitanya as one of his most devoted associates. Sri Advaita, who was the acknowledged leader of the small Vaishnava community of Navadvip at the time of the appearance of Sri Caitanya, was a person of vast erudition, possessed of great wealth and occupied a position of the highest respect in the society of Navadvip. He appears to have been originally a native of the village of Nabagram in some as yet unidentified part of Bengal. He subsequently settled at Santipur, whither he had come in course of a pilgrimage that he had undertaken after the departure of his parents from this world. At Santipur he married Sri Sita Devi. Sri Advaita met Thakur Haridas for the first time at Santipur, where he offered him the meal on the occasion of the annual funeral ceremony of his departed father, instead of giving the same to the Brahmanas by seminal birth as is the custom of the Smartas. Advaita built a small house at Navadvip where he set up his academy, Tal, in which he taught different branches of the Shastras. Advaita soon acquired the reputation of being one of the most eminent professors of Navadvip, who upheld in all his teachings the preeminence of the principle of unalloyed devotion to Krishna, which he conclusively established by the evidence of the whole body of the scriptures. This marked him out from among the host of the other Brahmanas who also taught the scriptures at Navadvip. Sri Advaita, in conformity with his teaching, was a devout worshipper of Krishna. He did not perform his worship with the elaborate ceremonials that characterized its development in the Dvapara age. He worshipped Krishna with the offerings of the spray of Tulasi, most beloved of Krishna, and the sacred water of the Ganges which issued from his feet. This simplicity of worship a concomitant of the philosophy of pure, transcendental devotion which he expounded in his academy. He wanted to keep the pure devotion to Krishna distinct from the lifeless rituals of the elevationists and liberationists. Advaita worshipped Krishna with the pure devotion of unclouded cognition and with the specific purpose of moving Krishna to come down into the world to re-establish the eternal religion. The advent of Sri Caitanya is attributed by all his devotees to the sincere and ardent invocations of Sri Advaita. That Advaita's prayers and worship brought about the appearance of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Caitanya in this world has been repeatedly declared by Sri Caitanya himself. The Academy of Sri Advaita was the regular meeting place of all the Vaishnavas, of whom the foremost was Sribas Pandit, who lived close to Advaita, not far from the house of Sri Jagannatha Misra. Sri Advaita belonged to the community of Sri Madhvakarya, which is one of the 4 authorized Vaishnava communities. He was the disciple of the famous Madhabendra Puri, the spiritual preceptor of Sri Nityananda, Sri Iswarapuri, and several other elders of Sri Caitanya. Madhabendra Puri is regarded by the most illustrious followers of Sri Caitanya as the first tender shoot of the mighty tree of transcendental love, represented by Sri Caitanya himself in its full growth. There is to be found no trace of the amorous love for Krishna in the school of Madhva prior to Madhabendra Puri. The disciplic succession of the followers of Sri Caitanya through Madhabendra Puri is to be found in Sri Gauraganadesa, Sri Prema Ratnavali, the works of Sri Gopal Guru Goswami, and also in the Bhakta Ratnakar. The line of succession is as follows: Krishna Brahma Narada Vyasa Sukha Madhva Padmanabhan Rihari Madhava Akshabhya Jayatirtha Jnanazindhu Dayaniti Vidyaniti Rajendra Jyabrahma Purusottama Brahmaniya Vyasa Tirtha Lakshmapati Madhabendra Puri Nityananda Iswarapuri Advaita Sri Caitanya. We reserve the detailed discussion of the esoteric implication of the spiritual disciplic succession for a future chapter in connection with the doctrine of Sri Caitanya. The following particulars regarding Sri Madhabendra Puri are found in Sri Caitanya Charitamrita. He went, unattended by any other person, to Sri Brindavana. On his arrival there, as he was seated under a tree on the bank of the pool Kunda of Govinda, Sri Krishna appeared to Madhabendra as a cowboy under the guise of offering him milk for appeasing his hunger. Led by a dream, Madhabendra then installed the divine form of Gopala on the Gobardhana Mount. His sojourn to Puri to fetch camphor and sandal for Gopala and the episode of Kshirakora Gopinath will be described later. At Mathura, Madhabendra Puri accepted the alms of cooked food from a Sanriya Brahmana, whose touched water is not accepted by high-class smartas, in violation of the smarta practice which errs by applying caste rules to the devotee of Godhead and its notions of ceremonial cleanliness to food accepted by Krishna. Mahaprasad. Madhabendra Puri rebuked Ramachandra Puri for his disrespect to himself, his spiritual preceptor, and blessed Iswarapuri for his wholehearted devotion to his preceptor by expressing the hope that he might attain to love for Krishna. Sri Madhabendra Puri's utterance at his disappearance is cherished by all pure devotees. It runs thus: Thou Lord, who art ever melted to kindness towards the humble, when wilt thou, O Lord of Mathura, be seen by me? My heart, dearest, sad for not beholding thee, grows delirious. Oh, what shall I do now? Sri Iswarapuri came of a Brahmana family belonging to the village of Kumarahata, near Halishahar station of the E.B. railway, and was the most beloved disciple of Sri Madhabendra Puri. Sri Madhabendra Puri, being satisfied with his devotion, blessed him, saying, May you attain loving devotion for Krishna. Sri Caitanya did him the favor of receiving initiation in the 10-lettered mantra from him at Gaya. Govinda and Kashaswara Brahmachari, disciples of Sri Iswarapuri, joined Sri Caitanya at Puri on the disappearance of Sri Iswarapuri. The attitude, which the reader is expected to take up towards the associates of Sri Caitanya, is put tersely in the opening verse of Sri Caitanya Charitamrita. Sri Krishna Caitanya is Godhead himself, as is indicated by his name, who means the self-conscious principle, Krishna. Godhead sports in 6 divine forms, viz. As 1. Krishna, 2. The 2 preceptors, 3. The devotees, 4. The avatars, 5. The manifestations, and 6. The powers. In other words, the spiritual preceptors are Caitanya Deva. The devotees such as Sribas, etc., are also Caitanya Deva. The avatars are Caitanya Deva. And the powers are also Caitanya Deva, who is himself Krishna's own cognitive self, the subjective divine personality whose essence is pure cognition. We shall discuss these truths in greater detail in the succeeding chapters. I have tried briefly to put before the reader some of those considerations, the substantive truth of which has to be realized by the disciple in order to be fit for studying profitably the holy narrative of the career of Sri Caitanya. I cannot do better than conclude this chapter with the cautious words of Thakur Brindabandas: Know for certain that the activities of Chaitanya Chandra, by listening to which the heart is purified, manifest themselves only by the grace of the devotees of Godhead. Who can know the deeds of Chaitanya that are the hidden secret of the Vedas? I write only what I have heard from the lips of the devotees. I make my obeisance at the feet of all the Vaishnavas. May there be no offense committed by me by such an attempt. Chapter I.E. Birth and Infancy. Why Krishna comes into this world is known only to himself. The invocation of the Lord by Sri Advaita is stated by devotees as the cause of the advent of Sri Chaitanya. The spiritual academy of Advaita was the gathering place of all the Vaishnavas of Navadvip. There they met daily and spent a greater part of their time in holy discourses about Krishna. They were regarded as a peculiar group whose ways and words appeared alike singular and distasteful to the people in the midst of whom they found themselves placed by Providence. This small group of devotees felt keenly for the miseries that their worldly-minded brethren brought upon themselves by their attachment to interests other than Krishna. They tried to instruct them about Krishna, but this only served to increase all the more their aversion to Krishna and his devotees. It was this apparently hopeless state of affairs that led Advaita to the conclusion that the universal and stubborn godlessness that prevailed everywhere could only be relieved by Krishnachandra himself. Advaita believed in the efficacy of prayer that is offered by one who knows nothing except Godhead. He believed that the intolerable anguish of those sincere devotees who daily gathered under his roof, caused by the extreme misery of the worldly people due to their bitter aversion to Krishna, must appeal to the Lord and have power to draw him in no long time from his eternal seat of Goloka into this world, for the consolation of his own beloved ones. Advaita, who was well versed in the scriptures, noticed all these favorable indications. He was so convinced of the impending appearance of Krishna that in his prayers he began to call upon him most ardently night and day to save the world by his speedy appearance. That Advaita felt sure about the appearance of Sri Krishna and worshipped him for this specific purpose with tulasi and the holy water of the Ganges, which are most acceptable to Krishna, with the single-hearted desire for his appearance, was known to all the Vaishnavas. He, in fact, actually assured them most clearly and emphatically about the expected advent of Krishna into their midst within a short time. I have stated already that Sri Chaitanya himself repeatedly declared that his advent was solely due to the wholehearted prayers of Advaita. The advent of Sri Chaitanya in the particular Kali age that follows the appearance of Sri Krishna at the close of Dvapara is also hinted by the scriptures. In the Mahabharata it is declared that Krishna appears in the Kali age as a Brahmana with a yellow complexion to promulgate the yajna in the form of congregational chanting of the Kirtana of Hari. The Bhagavatam contains the same statement and adds that Krishna appears in the above manner in the Kali age with all his kin, associates, consorts and servitors. Krishna himself appears towards the end of the Dvapara age of the Vaivasvata Manvantara of the 28th aggregate of 4 yugas of the Kalpa of the White Boar. He appears as a Brahmana with the yellow complexion in the particular Kali age following his appearance in the Dvapara. In the Dvapara Krishna appears as Godhead served by his consorts, kindred and servitors. In the Kali age Sri Krishna Chaitanya appears as the best of devotees in company of the congregation of devotees, viz. his own beloved ones, in order to teach by his own example how Krishna, i.e., he himself, is to be served. This is the main cause of the advent of Sri Chaitanya. The prayer of Advaita and the suffering of the devotees are the secondary cause. Unless this real cause of his appearance is properly grasped, the most characteristic activities of Sri Chaitanya can never be rightly understood. The appearance of Sri Chaitanya came about in the following way. In Navadvip there dwelt a most generous and pure-hearted Brahmana devoted to the zealous performance of all religious duties, resembling in his immaculate piety Vasudeva, the father of Sri Krishna. The name of this ideal Brahmana was Sri Jagannath Misra. We have stated his ancestry in another place. His revered consort's name was Sri Sachi Devi. Sri Sachi Devi was the most loyal of matrons, the very embodiment of the pure devotion to Vishnu and mother of the whole world. 8 daughters were born to Sachi Devi one after another, all of them leaving this world in their infancy. The 9th issue was a son whom his parents obtained in response to their prayer to Vishnu for a male offspring. The name of this boy was Bisvarupa, the elder brother of Sri Chaitanya. Sri Krishna entered the persons of Sachi and Jagannath Misra towards the end of the month of Mag in the Sakha year 1406, January, 1485 AD. The mouths of Sri Ananta uttered paeans of triumph that were heard by Sachi and Jagannath as in a dream. Jagannath Misra thereupon said to Sachi, I had a dream that a realm of light entered my heart and from my heart it passed into yours. It seems some great personage is about to be born. There were other indications. Misra felt a difference everywhere. His body and the house appeared shining like a place dwelt by Lakshmi, the goddess of every well-being. All people showed him honor at all places. Money, clothing, rice, etc. poured unsolicited into his house. Sachi noticed heavenly figures in the sky that appeared in the attitude of prayer to herself, but no one else observed them. Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi felt transported with inexpressible delight, and applying themselves with a mind restrained from all other pursuits and with special ardor to the worship of Sri Shalagrama, awaited the impending advent of the Lord. 13 months were passed in this state of expectant suspense. Sri Krishna Chaitanya made his auspicious appearance in this world on the 23rd day of Falgun of the Sakha year 1407, which corresponds to the 18th of February of 1486 AD. He was born in the evening just with the rising of the full moon, which was then in eclipse, in the midst of the loud chant of the name of Hari by the people of Nadia, as is the custom on the occasion of an eclipse. Nature joined with man and the gods to pay homage to the moon of Nadia risen on the eastern hills. The spotted lunar disk hid its face in shame, under the guise of eclipse, on the appearance of the perfect moon absolutely free from all spots. On that blessed moment of nativity of the exquisitely beautiful baby were shed in unstinted profusion all the most auspicious influences of all the favoring constellations that blended together to greet the advent of the Lord. Strange forms were observed to crowd into the yard of Sachi, lying prostrate on the bare earth in the act of adoration, waving the whisk, holding aloft the umbrella, singing, dancing and beating the drum or playing on the flute, in an ecstasy of unbounded joy. That very moment Advaita suddenly leapt with delight in home and danced with joy arm in arm with Thakur Haridas, to the blissful surprise of onlookers. All the devotees had the same experience. The tide of joy that swept and eddied over all Nadia and threw the very birds and beasts and all dumb nature into a delirium of ecstatic joy, the pens of Thakur Brindabandas and Kavira Goswami are alone privileged to describe. The brush of no earthly or celestial painter can do justice to the delicate assemblage of color, warmth, holy perfume, the volume of delirious joy, free from the least suggestion of grossness, that manifested themselves at the birth of Sri Krishna Chaitanya and have ever clung to the holy eve of his advent, most highly cherished by all pure devotees who declare the worship of the day of the Lord's advent to have power to kindle love for Krishna. The birth of the baby drew a long train of visitors, male and female, who hastened to have a view of the divine child and make suitable offerings. Gods and goddesses, assuming the forms of men and women, mixing with the crowd, made their way to the home of Jagannath Misra, in order to obtain a sight of the baby and greet the feet of Sri Gaura Sundar. Dancers, singers, musicians, promulgators of auspicious tidings, flocked thither to swell the joy of the festive occasion. Sri Chandraskaracharya and Sribas Pundit duly performed the purificatory birth rites of the son of Jagannath Misra. Sri Purandar Misra made suitable gifts to all those who brought presents for his boy on this auspicious occasion. Sri Sita Thakurani, the consort of Advaita, made her way to Sri Mupur from her residence at Santipur to see the Prince of Boys. Sri Maulini Devi, pure-hearted consort of Sribas Pundit, accompanied Sita Thakurani with various presents and afforded her eyes the opportunity that they longed for, like the bird Chakora, of feasting on the nectar flowing from the moon-like face of the transcendental baby. Misra distributed whatever he had, with an open hand, to the Brahmanas, having first offered the same to Godhead. He kept back nothing of the rich variety of presents for himself. Sri Nilambra Chakravarti, father of Sachi Devi, taking Misra aside, informed him in a whisper that the signs on the person of the child prognosticated a very great transcendental personage who would deliver the world. The birth of Sri Chaitanya, of which we have culled the above account from the narratives of his associates, was never regarded by them as anything like the ordinary occurrence of this world with which all of us are so familiar. The raison d'etre of their attitude is thus put by Thakur Brindabandas in a passage of the Nativity hymn sung by the gods on the occasion. He, who is all will, who can destroy the whole world at his will, could certainly also therefore destroy Kamsa, Ravana and other enemies of Godhead instantaneously, and by his mere fiat. But although he could do so, he killed Ravana by being himself born in the home of Dasaratha and slew Kamsa by being himself born as the son of Vasudeva. Because he is ever full of all joyous activities, the realm of Nabadwap where Krishna makes his appearance is no mundane region. The transcendental realm of Sri Krishna is identical with the power of Godhead known as Nila or Leela and is an object of worship of his devotees. The Yoga Pitha, i.e., the abode of Sachi Jagannath, situate in the center of Sri Mupur, is the plane of the appearance of the Lord and is identical with Brindavana or the mind of the devotee constituted of the pure cognitive essence. Sri Nabadwap is replete with the ninfold devotion, being of the nature of the heart of those pure devotees who have found the refuge of the lotus feet of Sri Gurudeva. Such is the language of realization that is used by the devotees in regard to Nabadwap, which is necessarily unintelligible by the method of delusive mundane analogies. But we need not, therefore, reject the testimony of those whom we have accepted as our authorities, not on the ground that it is untrustworthy or dishonest, but for the irrelevant reason that it is not perfectly intelligible to those who are destitute of pure devotion to the holy feet of Godhead. This would be against all principles of impartial history and, as regards the theistic account, will result in the retention of the chaff by elimination of the grain under the untenable plea of our own ignorance. We have merely referred to certain spiritual values to prevent misconception of the great event that we are describing. Those values will be fully discussed later on when we arrive at the proper point of the narrative. But there are other considerations that it is necessary to place before the reader in order to enable him to follow the development of the narrative itself. Godhead and his devotees appear in this world by the operation of the transcendental positive power of the divinity that directly attends on his person. Individual souls, jivas, are born by the operation of the deluding stupefying power of Godhead that can never abide in the presence of the divinity. The material cases enveloping individual souls, jivas, are the creation of the deluding power, and such envelopment is the misfortune that overtakes them in consequence of the deliberate practice of aversion to Godhead. The worldly birth, through the medium of material bodies, belongs to the category of material phenomena, being brought about by the operation of the deluding energy as the result of the soul's desire for worldly enjoyment. The appearance of Godhead and his devotees in this world is not the consequence of the practice of any previous aversion to Godhead either by wish or activity, nor due to the operation of the deluding power. Godhead and his devotees appear in this world their own will through the medium of the transcendental power. The nature of Godhead and his devotees is such that it simultaneously enlightens and deludes conditioned souls to whom they appear. They reveal their transcendence to those conditioned souls who sincerely want to serve the Lord, and at one and the same time appear to those who are averse to his service as deluding phenomena of this world. The birth of Godhead, the realm of Godhead, the devotees of Godhead thus remain, in their proper transcendental nature, ever inaccessible to the deluded understanding of all irreverent persons. This may not be tasty to arrogant godless intellectualism, but is nevertheless the only position that is perfectly reasonable and logical to the understanding that is not prepared to hypocritically disown its consciousness of its present limitations and the consequent imperative necessity of welcoming the entry of the truth. However opposed the truth may seem at first sight to all its most deeply cherished prejudices. Those, therefore, who are prepared to maintain that the birth of Sri Caitanya is an ordinary affair of this world, start deliberately on the wrong track and should not blame anybody but themselves if they find the narrative not perfectly amenable to those rules of probability which are derived from their worldly experience. Sri Caitanya's birth appeared, for this very reason at the time of its occurrence, as an ordinary event of this world to his contemporaries with the exception of the comparatively small group of his devotees. It is not the untrue experience of the atheists which the reader of these pages is offered as the history of theism. Neither is he asked to deny the existence of the experience of the atheists. But he is asked not to accept their experience as theistic or true, nor to confound Godhead with the fallen souls of this world. The birth of Sri Caitanya was brought about by the operation of the transcendental power of Godhead, who is categorically different from his material energy. Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi, who is not metaphorically but really the mother of the whole world, are the eternal parents of Godhead. Their minds and bodies are constituted of the principle of pure cognition, which is categorically different from the constituent principle of the body and mind of ordinary mortals. Vasudeva is the scriptural term to denote this pure cognitive essence. Vasudeva, son of Vasudeva, manifests himself only in Vasudeva, or the pure consciousness, for playing his pastimes. The relationship between Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi, or the seeming pregnancy of the latter, does not belong to the category of the sensual affairs of men and women who are given to the pleasures of the flesh. The real significance of the conception of the Lord by Sri Sachi Devi and of its transcendental purity will appear to the mind only if it is in a position to realize the eternal difference between the spiritual and the material. The account of the devotees will then be truly understood, and it cannot be understood in any other way even by the greatest intellectual giants of this world. The process of the transcendental birth of Godhead is thus described in Srimad Bhagavatam. Thereafter the portion of the chain Gulas transmitted by Sri Vasudeva was conceived by Devaki of pure cognitive essence. Just as the quarter of the east conceives the image of the moon, Sri Devaki also conceived in the same manner Sri Hari, the supreme soul of all souls, by her non-mundane mind. This process is not confined to only Vasudeva and Devaki. It is the same also in the case of the devotees. Before Godhead manifests himself to the devotee in the visible form, a long period passes during which he is manifest internally in his pure consciousness. Thereafter, as the quarter of the east holds the disk of the moon, Devaki of pure cognition by the process of initiation in Krishna by Surasena, Vasudeva, received in her transcendentally pure heart Sri Achyuta, the embodiment of the universal well-being, the supreme soul of all souls. From these statements of the Bhagavatam it would appear that Sri Krishna first appeared in the heart of Anakudandubi and from there appeared in the heart of Sri Devaki. The entry into the womb of Sri Devaki alluded to in the Nativity hymn of the Bhagavatam is not different from the above. Godhead and his devotees are not born by the operation of the material energy by means of the seminal fluid and blood, etc. The greatest of all offenses that it is possible to commit against the divinity is to suppose that his body is material like that of the bound jiva. Godhead and his devotees have no material bodies and are not born by the operation of any material conditions. The appearance of Sri Caitanya and his devotees is free from any touch of the material principle. This is the realization of all the devotees in accordance with the declaration of the scriptures. Theistic history, although it certainly transcends and explains, does not ignore this phenomenal world. And those who object to the transcendental on the ground that it is not conformable by the worldly experience of men do not thereby disprove either the reality or the necessity of such history. The successive disappearances of 8 daughters, followed by the appearance of Viswarup and Sri Caitanya, the 2 sons of Sri Sachi Devi, are explained on the analogy of the case of Sri Devaki recorded in the Bhagavatam as symbolizing the esoteric fact that the appearance of Sri Krishna is preceded by that of Samkarsana, the pure cognitive principle who manifests himself on the subsidence of the eightfold envelope of physical nature, viz. The 8 pseudo-egoistic principles that bars the access of the bound jiva to the transcendental. The necessity of the closest consideration of the difference between the spiritual and material can alone enable one to reconcile the apparently contradictory statements regarding the absolute that are a subject of standing complaint to all who, for extraneous reasons, do not seek the explanation in the scriptures themselves. The Lord says, "I exist eternally. Nothing existed before me, neither the non-existent nor the existent, and nothing exists to the end and beyond the end except myself. Therefore, those foolish persons, who think slightingly of my human form, do so through ignorance of my real nature who transcends everything of this world. They think that I am like themselves, subject to the laws that have been made by myself. They cannot understand that I exist in absolute independence of all rules which only serve to manifest myself. And that I am the supreme lord of everything including all rules and conditions. Therefore, I can make my real form visible to mortal eyes without ceasing to be the master of this world and without submitting to any laws of physical nature, and may at the same time delude all those who are averse to me by appearing to them as an ordinary human being, subject, like themselves, to the operation of the laws of this universe. Know that this is the specific privilege reserved for Godhead, and herein lies the proof of his supremacy, that he remains unaffected by the qualities of physical nature even when he appears to be situated within its sphere. Godhead has a specific personality of his own, but he is subject to no limitations. In him all opposite qualities meet and are reconciled, losing all their apparent grossness. But he also chooses to appear as an abstract principle to the idealist and as capable of grossness to the materialist, who are thus punished for trying to make the absolute submit to their deluded speculations. Sri Caitanya appeared in this world on the full moon eve of the month of Falgun, that most glorious eve of spring, which is reverentially consecrated to the swinging festival of Sri Krishna, like unto the spotless moon risen on the eastern hills of Goadisha, the lunar disk itself having just then undergone a total eclipse. His advent was greeted by an outburst of the universal chant of the name Hari by all people of Nadia. In the midst of this unconscious jubilation, the baby came out of the mother's womb and began at once to smile. Sachi and Jagannath were transformed into the very image of joy on beholding the beautiful face of their son. The ladies in attendance got perplexed and did not know what to do, and accordingly began, for no reason, to shout haze, jubilations. The glad tidings quickly brought together all the relations and friends who dwelt in the neighborhood. We have already related the communication of Sri Nilambara Chakravarti, father of Sachi Devi, to Misra regarding the marvelous signs that he noticed on the person of the newborn babe. Nilambra Chakravarti was a very great astrologer. After considering the positions of the planets and the constellations at the birth of the child, he declared that the boy would be far greater than a king, greater than Brihaspati, the celestial sage, in learning, and would without effort come to possess all good qualities. Presently there arrived by accident a certain Brahmana, also an astrologer, who applied himself to the casting of the horoscope of the newborn. That Brahmana declared as the result of his calculations that the boy is no other than Narayana himself. He will re-establish the religion. He will be the extraordinary preacher of the religion. He will deliver the whole world. All persons will obtain from him what is constantly coveted by the greatest devotees, such as Brahma, Siva, Sukha, etc. At the sight of him all the people of the world will be melted to pity for all jivas, become indifferent to pain and pleasure alike, and attain to love for him, the embodiment of love for Krishna. Not to speak of others, even the Yavanas, who are declared enemies of Vishnu, will worship the feet of this child. All the countless worlds will sing his praise. All people, from the Brahmanas downwards, will do obeisance to him. His form is the very embodiment of the religion of the greatest devotees, the embodiment of patience and of respect for the gods, Brahmanas, preceptors and parents. Just as Vishnu appearing in this world persuades all jivas to religion, exactly same will be all the doings of this child. How fortunate indeed am I to be called to calculate such a horoscope. His name will be Sri Vishwambhar. The astrologer purposely omitted to mention the renunciation of Sri Caitanya, lest it would mar the unmixed happiness of the occasion. Misra was so greatly moved by these statements that he first of all thought of offering a suitable reward to the astrologer. But, presently, remembering the extreme poverty of himself, grasped the feet of the Brahmana and burst into tears, unable any longer to contain his joy. That Brahmana also wept, clasping the feet of Sri Jagannath Misra. All the people caught the impulse and joyously shouted the name of Hari. The friends and well-wishers of Misra, on hearing of the nature of the divine horoscope, joined in this loud demonstration of joy. It may interest the reader to be reminded of the fact that the great astrologer Garga, who calculated the horoscope of Sri Krishna, is described in the Bhagavatam as a Brahmana skilled in the transcendental science. The name Viswambhara is applied to Vishnu in the 8th Arva Veda Samhita 2-3-4-5 and means one who holds or nourishes the world. Sachi noticed female figures, who were divinely beautiful, who smilingly put blades of the durba with grains of unhusked rice on the head of the infant and uttered the benedictory formula, "Live thou forever," and who took the dust of her feet on their heads as they departed. Sachi was dumb with joy and could not even ask the names of those newcomers. These performances were accompanied by the customary song, dance and music of the professional musicians on such occasions. The baby had to remain for a full month in the lying-in chamber according to custom. The small hut that was made for the occasion for the temporary accommodation of the mother and the child was watched night and day by all kinsfolk. This was due to two reasons. The boy cried incessantly and kept quiet only just as long as he heard the name of Hari uttered in a loud voice. This was soon grasped by all, who chanted aloud the name of Hari as soon as the child began to cry, as the only means of pacifying him. There was another reason for constant vigilance. There was an unaccountable fear, which was shared by all persons, that the life of the baby was in danger from goblins and thieves. They accordingly often recited the customary invocations to Vishnu and Devi for the protection of the child. The name of Nrisimha was often similarly taken. Mantrams were used to render all sides of the hut secure against evil influences. But notwithstanding all these precautions, there were frequent alarms caused by supposed detection of the egress of thieves and goblins who often made their way into the house unperceived even by such a large body of devoted watchers. It was, in fact, the gods who played all these pranks for a sight of the baby and lingered to amuse on the causeless anxiety of all persons on the baby's account. At the end of the period of confinement, all the ladies accompanied Sri Sachi Devi for her bath in the Bhagirathi. After bathing in the river and having worshipped the Ganges, they made their way to the grove of the goddess Sachi accompanied by singers and musicians. On their return to the house, Sachi honored every one of the party by presents of fried rice, plantain, oil, vermilion, areca nut and betel. Thereupon the ladies went back to their homes after greeting the feet of the mother. Orthodox Smarta Hindus are likely to read in the above account an apparent justification of their customary practices as being confirmed by having been duly observed by Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi, whose minds are free from all impurities and errors. Those, on the other hand, who look upon such local Hindu practices as being due to ignorance of the Shastras, superstition or historical circumstances, will also naturally experience a certain measure of the qualms of an outraged conscience if they have to prepare to swallow these descriptions, with the best of grace that they can call to their help, through sheer goodwill for an otherwise untenable cause. Historians will feel scandalized by this attempt to chronicle the unnecessary details of such petty domestic matters that are perfectly known to everybody. Those who look for the account of the absolute as a philosophical realization will regard it as puerile sentimentalism. Those who believe in the personal God but expect a narrative in keeping with the supreme dignity of the subject may also be disposed to scratch their heads. And the atheists will pooh-pooh what they will at once recognize as a brazen, ridiculous, insipid, and silly attempt of passing off the minutiae of Bengali superstitious usages upon credulous religionists in the name of the latest divine dispensation, etc., etc. But the reader, who has followed the narrative so far, need not be told that events that happen in this world are divisible into two groups that are quite distinct from one another, viz. 1. Those events that take place on the physical plane, and 2. Those that occurring on the spiritual manifest themselves also on the mundane plane. The birth of Godhead in this world is an event that belongs to the second group. It appears like an event belonging to the first group, to all bound jivas, for the reason that they try to see Godhead by their own right, whereas the Absolute never submits to the inspection of the limited. To such people accordingly even the transcendental activities of Godhead appear as limited occurrences capable of being accurately graded in an order of importance. But Krishna is declared by the scriptures to be identical with the Absolute Truth, whose activities admit of no such offensive classifications. Good and bad, great and small, are notions that only belong to the realm of the relative, limited, divisible and fragmentary knowledge. The reality is only one, in spite of the fact that only a perverted view of him happens to be the sole, undoubted birthright of all conditioned souls. No event is really good or bad, small or great. All events are of infinite dimensions and instinct with the cognitive potency. They appear to be limited, inert, cramped and possessed of unwholesome qualities to those jivas whose own nature seem to their deluded judgment to be limited, inert, cramped and gross for the time being. The vision of the devotee is free from all defect, and when they describe to us what they see, we, conditioned souls, pretend to feel in duty bound to disagree with them on the strength of our own unreliable but actual experience of those very same events. No petty domestic event of this world, meaning what appears as such to the vision of bound jivas, can have even its so-called limited existence unless it belongs to the realm of Vaikuntha, where it can be also neither petty nor great in the material sense. The domestic events, connected with Godhead himself and his own, when he chooses to appear in this world, possess this additional peculiarity that they are really free from all grossness even from the point of view of the bound jiva, if he does not deliberately shut his eyes and ears and refuse to see and hear. That is to say, if he only really begins to see and hear with an unbiased mind, he at once realizes this truth for himself. This process is known as the descent of the transcendental into this world. The birth and activities of conditioned souls, jivas, do not possess the transcendental quality. Their bodies and minds are of this world and their activities are only insubstantial mimicries of the reality. This mimicry is not absolute but relative reality, being the result of the operation of the deluding power of Godhead. Its existence is not denied, nor its nature, which is, however, categorically different from that of the spiritual. Its essence is comparable to that of the reflected image of the actual form of an object. By no manner of inspection of the image a knowledge of the nature and qualities of the actual substance can be obtained. But when the actual substance presents itself to our inspection, we can easily get the true knowledge of it, if only we do not perversely choose to regard it as image on the strength of deceptive analogical arguments supplied by our exclusive experience of a world of reflected images. The paternal affection of Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi for Sri Gaur Sundar is also likewise different from the apparently similar affection of mundane parents for their mundane child. In the former case, the parents, son and affection are real and free from all worldly grossness, while the latter is a perverted mimicry of the same event reflected on the screen of the physical plane. But this qualitative difference between the two cannot be grasped by those who have not the patience to give an unbiased hearing to the words of the devotees describing the reality, who alone possesses an unclouded vision, even though they may appear to hasty, prejudiced or superficial observers to be in no way unlike ordinary bound jivas. The devotees alone can teach us the real meaning of the scriptures, and our duty, as will appear from what has been said already, consists in listening to their words with faith in order to be able to understand what they have got to deliver. The affection of Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi for their divine son, being the substantive reality, deserves to be considered by all bound jivas from every angle of vision, with the object not of ignoring but of understanding its transcendental nature. Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi, by reason of their perfect purity of heart when they desired to have a son born to them, could only mean to serve Godhead thereby. This exclusive and real reference to him in every act is innate in the only function of the pure cognitive principle. A really pure heart is not satisfied with the mundane relationship, neither does it want to lose the faculty for contracting all relationship. It wants to realize all relationships in their true forms. This is its very nature, who finds himself thwarted at every step in the conditioned state by undesirable factors. The ascetic's heart is not really pure if it stands merely for the negation of all attachments for the reason that they happen to be always of a mixed character in this world. Such a view errs by seeking the ease of its deluded self by the self-contradictory process of suicide. This is the strange aspiration of all negativist thinkers. Those whose hearts are somewhat purer try to adjust themselves to existing conditions to the best of their power. They also err inasmuch as they vainly try to deal with the shadow by gratuitously assuming it to be the substance. This wild goose chase goes in our Shastras under the name of fruitive work, karma. Those whose hearts are purest begin to see the impossibility and unwholesomeness of the task that is attempted by fruitive workers and the suicidal policy of nihilistic thinkers and ascetics. It is at this stage that the reality manifests himself of his own accord to the absolutely pure vision. And as soon as such favored persons have thus a vision of the truth, they want to communicate the tidings of him to their suffering brethren. But they soon find that the hearts of the latter are not sufficiently pure either to grasp or even tolerate the real truth, whom they also profess with their lips to be willing to serve. Such perverse people can hardly be expected to understand the nature of the longing for a son of Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi, nor the reason of their causeless and holy joy on beholding the beautiful face of newborn Gaur Sundar. Of course, neither Sri Jagannath Misra nor Sri Sachi Devi was aware that their son was Sri Krishna himself. They simply looked upon Sri Gaur Sundar as their son, whom it was their duty and pleasure to serve in every way. This is also the highest form of the spiritual service. The Lord can be served in all circumstances and under every form. He is served as a son, because a perfectly pure heart serves nothing except the Lord, but also does so unconsciously by reason of the very perfection of his serving disposition. Those who want to serve Sri Krishna as their son in a conscious way are not altogether free from the idea of reverence due to Godhead. They will fail to practice the unmixed parental affection for the Lord if they are at all conscious of his divinity. In such a case they will revere and love him. Such parental affection does not perfectly please Godhead, the Son. He wants to be served with the perfect impulse of unmixed parental love, which is absolutely free from any considerations that stand in the way of loving by a spontaneous impulse. In such hearts the Lord himself appears as the Son, who is also entirely dependent on his parents for his safety and nourishment. It will appear, therefore, that the only condition of the service of the Lord is a perfectly pure heart. No opposition to form is admissible. Therefore, those who look only to the form may suppose that the customs of Bengal or India should be adopted if the Lord is to be properly served. This is the national or smarta point of view. The perfectly pure heart is neither wedded nor opposed to the form of the mundane customs of any age or country. What he wants to do is to serve the Lord. Any real method is legitimate that actually enables him to do this one thing needful. If he appears thereby to put himself even under specific restraints, he does so for all the greater facility of such unconditional service. Why the devotee behaves in a particular way is known only to himself and to Krishna. It is not something external and capable of external regulation or explanation. It is perfectly free. It cannot be squeezed into the four corners of a social or a tentative religious code. Whatever the devotee does is right and proper by reason of his exclusive devotion to Sri Krishna. Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi really belong to this superior plane. Their conduct should not be supposed to come under any class of activities capable of being regulated by a conventional and rigid code of rules. Rules are intended for those who are disinclined to serve, i.e., for restraining those who are disposed to worldliness, for the purpose, if possible, of preventing a conduct that is incompatible with real freedom. But the rules themselves are not identical with freedom. The strict observance of any rules cannot produce the purity of heart that is necessarily free. Therefore, one must not allow himself to be unduly obsessed by these rules when one has to consider the transcendental conduct of the real devotee. We should rather try to understand the limits of the rules from the conduct of the devotee. It is only the underlying principle of devotion to Godhead that can impart any value to such rules. The worship of the Ganges and of the goddess Sasti by Sri Sachi Devi are such concrete processes. In her case they were rendered of universal significance fit for the service of the Lord by reason of her devotion to Sri Gaur Sundar. This led the Lord himself to directly accept any service, whatever its form, that was rendered by her pure heart. Whatever method is adopted for the service of the Lord forthwith loses its mundane character by reason of its being so employed and becomes spiritual on being accepted by Krishna. All those who watched the baby and recited invocatory verses calling upon Devi and Nrisimha for the protection of the baby also served the Lord in the perfect manner, because they served him spontaneously. Whenever any efforts are directed towards the divinity without reservation, they automatically lose all their unwholesomeness for the reason that God is pleased to accept our wholehearted service. This causeless divine mercy towards all souls prompted the appearance of Sri Gaur Sundar in this world. It will thus appear that any and all exercise of the senses, when it is really directed towards the Lord of our senses, is perfect, while apparently the same activity, when it is practiced towards any other object, is not only not perfect but is positively harmful, being obstructive of the possibility of attainment of the natural function. In the language of the Vaishnavas, serving Sri Krishna with all our spiritual senses is love, while similarly serving any other object is lust. Or to put it in another way, the desire to gratify the senses of Krishna is love, while the wish to satisfy one's own senses is lust. The proposition is liable to be misunderstood and, as a matter of fact, has actually been misunderstood in different ways. The philanthropists have supposed that it is mundane relationship with Krishna that is recommended. But as Krishna is not available in a bodily form in this world, they accordingly want to devise a method of serving themselves by personating Krishna and the milkmaids, or trying to imagine that they are spiritually occupied in every act of their gross sensuality. They choose to think gratuitously that Krishna is a being of this world like themselves. There is another class of philanthropists who proceed in the negative way, being repelled by the debaucheries of the first group. These suppose that it is a sin to believe that the Absolute can at all be served in a concrete manner. The Absolute is accordingly supposed to be capable of being served only on the mental plane by the homage of thought. These philanthropists keep their life in its concrete acts strictly separate from the Absolute, reserving it for the gratification of their own sensuous desires, excusing themselves by imagining that this is unavoidable as long as they continue in the state of mundane existence. They supplement their disregard of the virtuous activities of this life by an endeavor to rise above them, by meditation on the activities of Krishna, or by fictitious avoidance of all thinking. In these ways the people of this world delude themselves by the pernicious practice of actual debauchery, or by hypocritical and impracticable abstention, into supposing that their method is higher than that of professed sensualists. But in both cases the root of the error is the same, viz. The belief that Krishna, when he chooses to appear to us in the human form, puts on a body of flesh like ourselves, and that therefore, those who served him at the time of his appearance in different ways as servants, friends, parents, sweethearts, practiced activities that are in no way different from those with which we ourselves are so familiar in this world, and from the grossness of which we have no desire of seeking to escape. The one class directly swallows the mud, the other group pretends to live on nectar while actually deriving their sustenance from the same polluted source, but with great labor and through a longer pipe. None of them suspect that it is the mud, nor that it is capable of being transformed into nectar by the real touch of the divinity, or, in other words, that there is a third alternative to enjoyment and hypocritical show of abstention, which has the form of spiritual service that transcends both and reconciles those opposites on a higher plane. What is really necessary is not to wrangle over the sharing of the mud, but to be lifted out of such necessity for feasting on the manna. The idealist's position is a mere travesty by which the love of gross matter is attempted to be disguised from the observation of dull persons. But it only mocks the thirsty soul by the offer of the masked bowl of the dregs of the noxious preparation, in place of the ostentatiously filled cup of poison, to the thirsty soul who has need of only the life-giving drink. Chapter IV Infancy and Boyhood. But although Sri Gaurasundar submitted to be served by the unconscious perfect love of Brahma by his parents, relatives, friends and servants, his divinity was manifested in every act of his infancy, unnoticed by anyone. This is the hidden Leela of Sri Caitanya. He can never be really known except through his grace, which is available to all jivas who sincerely seek to obtain it. The baby continued to keep everybody occupied by his peculiar ways. The most noticeable of these was that he would begin to cry if he did not hear the loud chant of the name of Hari. So he was always surrounded by a group of ladies who sang constantly the kirtan in order to keep him in countenance. The moment they would begin to perform kirtan, the boy showed every mode of delight and would laugh in the most enchanting manner. They clapped their hands, sang and considered themselves amply repaid by his sweet smiles. This was noticed and advertised by everybody as a most extraordinary circumstance. The conduct of the baby and the devoted attachment of the ladies, who were so loath to leave his presence, form a most striking episode on which all narratives of his infancy love to dwell with great tenderness. The Lord used always to lie on his back surrounded by the ladies, except while he slept. One day Sachi was brought to the room where the baby slept, by his waking cry. As she entered the apartment, she was surprised to find the floor of the room littered with all different substances: oil, ghee, milk, curd, puddles, etc., with broken earthen pots, were all jumbled together in every part of the room. Sachi Devi chanted the name of Hari in order to pacify the baby of barely 4 months, who lay crying in his little bed. She noticed the presence of no other person in the room. Other members of the family presently came to the spot, but no one could discover any trace of an intruder. Some opined that a demon must have found his way into the room but failed to do any harm to the child by reason of his protective amulet. His failure to harm the baby had made him angry and commit all the mischief before he fled back to his place. Jagannath Misra, on beholding the scene of havoc, said nothing, regarding it as an act of the gods. The parents thought in this wise in their joy that no harm had befallen the baby. There was some funny incident or other like this every day, to afford an opportunity of service to the parents and others. Their service must not be supposed to be on a level with the activities of worldly people who are always very much attached to their own children. The affection of worldly people for their children is purely an attachment of the flesh for the flesh that serves to gratify their sensuous instincts. Such affection only rivets the chain of bondage to the thing of this world, all of which are the contrivances of the deluding energy or non-God. It was not so in this case. The paternal affection, that serves Godhead, is not only altogether different from the apparently similar worldly sentiment, but, on the contrary, is so much opposed in its nature to the latter that the two cannot coexist in the same heart. One who loves his worldly son as son can never realize the nature of the affection of Sri Sachi Devi and Sri Jagannath Misra for Sri Gaurasundar, because the worldly passion itself stands in the way of such realization. The time passed in such pastimes till at last the day of naming the baby made its appearance. For this purpose there assembled a number of friends versed in the scriptures, chief of whom was Sri Nilambara Chakravarti. There was also a corresponding gathering of the matrons. The latter declared that the baby should be called Nimai after the neem tree, for the reason that the bitter taste characteristic of the said tree would repel the god of death who had taken away so many children of his parents, and would also serve to scare away ghosts, demons and other evil spirits. The learned headed by Nilambara Chakravarti agreed to accept the name Nimai as a secondary one, and proposed Viswambhar as the primary name of the baby. The reason given for their choice of this name was that the fear of famine, which had threatened the whole country, had been dissipated by the birth of the child, which had brought in its train copious showers of rain after a prolonged drought. As the birth of the child had saved the world from famine, the name Viswambhar was appropriate for him as it means one who maintains the world. Another reason for the selection of the name was that in his horoscope the boy was described as the source light, which meant that all other lights of the family were derived from this one. The ceremony was performed at an auspicious moment amidst the holy chant of the name of Hari, the sound of conchas and bells, by men and gods, while the Brahmanas read the Gita and the Bhagavatam. Naming a baby is one of the 10 purificatory rites that are enjoined by the Shastras and are performed by the smartest to free a newborn child from sin due to the impurities of seminal birth from the mother's womb. The sin as well as its expiatory rite, as contemplated by the smartest, are conceived in terms of material well-being. There is no question in it of the soul or spiritual consideration. The birth of a bound jiva is no doubt a material circumstance, and the smarta rites are also admittedly a material device to ward off certain worldly results of such birth. The material world being the limit of the smarta outlook, a smarta family adheres to those ceremonies in the hope of the mundane reward promised by the sections of the scriptures that treat of fruitive works and ceremonies. But a Vaishnava has nothing to do with any so-called mundane well-being that has no connection with the soul. Moreover, Sri Gaurasundar's birth, or the birth of any devotee of Godhead, as we have seen already, is never to be considered, for very good reasons, as a temporal affair at all. What, therefore, it may be asked, is the significance of the parents of Sri Gaurasundar following the smarta practice that has led the Vaishnava narrators of the career of Sri Caitanya to write of it as a praiseworthy performance? We have already considered a similar objection in connection with the worship of the goddess Sasti by Sri Sachi Devi. The Vaishnavas regard the presiding deities of this mundane world as servants of Krsna and honor them as such. They do not regard them as independent divinities. They never worship these gods for securing any worldly advantages which are bestowed by them in accordance with the will of Godhead. The Vaishnavas hold that those gods are not fully pleased if they are worshipped for worldly favors, and, as servants of Godhead, they are also not entitled to be worshipped on their own account. They are fully and truly served by the worship of Godhead, and, therefore, the Vaishnavas worship only Vishnu. The worship of the goddess Sasti, who is protectress of newborn babies in the case of Sri Sachi Devi, did not, however, degenerate into polytheism or atheism for the reason that it happened to be performed for the sake of God himself. Any act that possesses this characteristic is essentially spiritual. The conduct of Sachi cannot, therefore, serve as a precedent to justify the similar materialistic smarta practices which have nothing to do with Godhead. The above argument applies to the performance by Sachi of all other shastric rites also. Those acts being performed for the sake of Godhead himself are thereby converted into spiritual service of Godhead, instead of being a cause of further bondage, which is the desired result of the smarta practices. The apparently similar activities of Sri Jagannath Misra and Sri Sachi Devi add new variety of exquisiteness to the service of Godhead, in the shape of parental affection. The name Viswambhar should not also be supposed to be on a level with the ordinary names that are bestowed on babies on this occasion by the smarta priests. The reason for the choice of the name, as given out by Sri Nilambara Chakravarti, the great astrologer of Nabadwip of his day, has been already reproduced. That statement deliberately conceals, under metaphorical garb, the truth that revealed himself clearly to him. The name Viswambhar is a well-known shastric name of the divinity. The name refers specifically to the acts of two avatars of Vishnu, Vis, the Vraha, boar, and the Hyagriba, horse-headed. The former lifted with his tusk the world submerged by the deluge, while the latter rescued the Vedas when they were on the point of being suppressed by materialistic learning. Anyone with a slight acquaintance with the scriptures would, in thinking of Godhead, connect these events with the name Viswambhar. The name Nimai, intended to scare away premature death and all fear, is also perfectly applicable to Godhead. But this is not all. Gargakriya, who calculated the name of Sri Krishna, is described in the Bhagavatam as being the greatest of those who know the Brahman and was selected for this reason by King Nanda to choose the name of his newborn son. In fact, no one who has not access to the spiritual realm can know the name of the divinity. The holy name of Godhead is eternal and is identical with Godhead himself. In the case of Godhead there is no difference between name, form, quality, acts and associates, as we find on the finite plane in the case of conditioned souls. The eternal name of God, who manifested himself to the pure consciousness of Sri Gargakriya, made himself known to the people of this world under the guise of the ceremony of naming the divine baby, for the highest benefit of the conditioned souls. The names Visambhar and Nimai similarly made themselves known through Sri Nilambara Chakravarti and the pure-hearted matrons, not to cleanse the so-called impurities of birth of the material body of a newborn child which is the object of the smarta ceremony, but in order to bless the whole world by making it possible for all conditioned souls to take the holy names of Godhead, identical with Godhead himself and having the specific power, if taken without offense, i.e., with the object of realizing one's eternally loving relationship with God, to deliver all fallen jivas from the bondage of this world. Sri Gargakriya disclosed the names Rama and Krishna, the most cherished treasures of his heart that was eternally illuminated with their divine radiance, confidentially to a few devotees only, lest they came to the ears of atheists like Kamsa who might be betrayed into the offense of confounding them with ordinary appellations of things of this world. The shloka of the Bhagavata embodying the statement of Garga on this subject also contains one of the few direct explicit references to the appearance of Krishna in the Kali age. The shloka may be quoted at this place. This son of yours, O Nanda, assumes different colors in the different ages. His color is white in the Satya age, red in the Treta, and Gora, i.e., yellow tinctured with red, in the Kali age. His color in this present age, Vipra, is black as you see. On the occasion of naming a baby there is an old custom of putting to the newborn child a variety of articles to induce him to choose any of them, in order to ascertain the natural bent of the infant. In pursuance of this time-honored custom a number of objects were held out to Nimai, such as unhusked rice, books, fried rice, cowrie, gold, silver, etc. Sri Jagannath Misra then called upon the child to choose whichever of them he liked. Nimai clasped the Bhagavatam tightly to his bosom. Some said that it was a very good augury and prognosticated that the child would be a great pundit. Others said he would be a Vaishnava and would easily understand the meaning of the scriptures. The preference shown for the Bhagavatam by Nimai may be explained as meaning that the acquisition of the riches of this world and even the maintenance of the body should not be valued for their own sake, and that the unalloyed service of the Lord, which is expounded in the Bhagavata, is the one thing needful and includes all the rest. This old custom may be interpreted as supplying a clue to another matter of importance. Why was it necessary for the father, the natural guardian of the infant, to try to ascertain the tendency of his newborn child? If the boy had chosen gold and silver or fried rice, what inference would be drawn? Would such inference have any effect on the future of the boy? If the son of a Brahmana is supposed to possess the nature of a Brahmana by reason of seminal birth, why should he be again subjected to a further test based on a different principle? How was the Varna, disposition, of a Brahmana really settled in very old times? In the case of Nimai it was comparatively easy by the above test to arrive at a favorable conclusion. The Bhagavatam has been declared to be the exposition of the holy Gayatri, the mantram, the knowledge of which is essential for the Brahmana. The choice of the Bhagavatam by Nimai, therefore, clearly would mark him out as possessing the natural disposition of a Brahmana. If seminal birth had been sufficient by itself to confer the Varna of a Brahmana, there would have been no meaning of the ceremony of spiritual purification by Gayatri, nor would the latter process be significantly styled the second birth. The texts support the view that the Varna of a Brahmana has to be fixed by natural disposition. There is also no text that attaches exclusive value to the seminal birth for the ascertainment of natural disposition. There are also many actual cases of the condition, Varna, of a Brahmana having been acquired by persons who were not born in Brahmana families. Conversely, we find that all the sons of a Brahmana did not necessarily become Brahmanas in every case. The Varna of the 100 sons of Rishabhadeva was settled by their respective dispositions. Some of them were found to be Kshatriyas, some were recognized as Brahmanas, while many were declared to be Vaishyas. The status of each was settled by the father who is avatara of the divinity. The bad effects and futility of trying to fix the spiritual status, Varna, of a Brahmana by birth alone are most vividly brought out in the career of Prahlada, on whom his father Hiranyakashipu tried forcibly to impose his own creed and occupation with the help of hereditary preceptors. The effects of heredity and education in forming one's disposition are overvalued by those who try to deduce everything from them. Heredity itself is a complex matter and runs backward in an endless ramification of ancestry through father and mother. No empiric pronouncement on the basis of heredity can be made, unless the nature of the whole of these two series is definitely known. Education, insofar as it tries to artificially widen our worldly experience, is also most uncertain in its operation on disposition. Seminal birth has been considered by the most ambitious of its modern empiric protagonists as decisive in settling one's physical and mental disposition that are closely interconnected. In our old scripture, seminal birth as well as secular and even empiric knowledge of the scriptures are categorically differentiated from the Gayatri birth and the transcendental knowledge respectively. The latter is nowhere declared as capable of being derived, or even helped in any way, by the former. The natural disposition of a Brahmana, that is conferred by the purificatory ceremony of the Gayatri mantram, and the transcendental knowledge, that is the result of initiation by the spiritual preceptor, refer to the soul and have nothing to do with the secondary enveloping disposition that manifests itself when the soul is engrossed in, i.e., incompatibly associated with, matter. Brahmanahood, according to the Mahabharatam, means the condition of a person possessing the disposition that seeks to realize the nature of the soul, and accordingly the status of a Brahmana should be conferred only on those persons in whom such disposition manifests itself, and by no other consideration. The spiritual status of the Brahmana cannot be tested and settled by anyone who does not himself possess the realized Brahmana disposition, that is to say, by no one except the spiritual preceptor. The purificatory rite is the authoritative recognition by the Guru of the possession of such disposition by the disciple. The recognition by the Guru also serves to bring into play the spiritual disposition. By mechanically mimicking the external rite, only confusion is caused, as it has been caused in the past, and is being still caused, by the unprincipled ambitions of men who are inordinately proud of their high lineage and worldly qualities. Unless the superior status corresponds to the internal disposition, there can be no proper subordination of the worldly to the spiritual interest which is sought to be effected by the Varnashrama organization under the lead of the Brahmanas. This settlement of the status, Varna, of a person was made soon after the birth of a child with the help of competent persons in order to provide specific training suited to the particular nature of the newborn child, for inclining him towards the spiritual life from the very beginning of his worldly sojourn. This may sound far too advanced an arrangement to be achieved in such remote antiquity, which modern history teaches us, on no conclusive evidence, to regard as having been universally utterly backward and benighted. Spiritual enlightenment is an eternal affair and has always possessed the inclination as well as capacity of organizing the spiritual community in its minutest details for helping the realization of the theistic ideal. The weakness that is nowadays noticeable in the historical organization of caste, which is regarded as the residual legacy of the Varnashrama organization, is due to atheistical preponderance. As the spiritual life slackened its manifestation in this world, the Varnashrama organization was increasingly neglected and was replaced by the meaningless, cumbrous and effete caste system. The pseudo-spiritual organization, viz. caste, failed to withstand the persevering onslaughts of organized materialism by means of its proper agents in the shape of the utterly barbarous tribes possessing no spiritual tradition that dwelt beyond the Indian borderland, who banded together for the purpose of overthrowing a decayed spiritual society. The morale of the Indian people had been completely undermined by the rise of the pseudo-religious systems and practices and by the atheistic speculations of the philosophers that have already been noticed briefly in a previous chapter. After India had been subjugated by the brute force of these foreign invaders, attempts were made from time to time by the Vaishnavacharyas to revive the theistic life in this country, against very great odds, in which they were not, however, permanently successful. This theistic reaction reached its culmination in the activities of Sri Caitanya, who propounded the comprehensive system that provides the true remedy for all the ills of the world, resting on the broad base of the whole body of the spiritual scriptures. The world is, however, not yet prepared to accept his teaching in its entirety, although the leading scholars of all the centers of culture in India of his day were decisively vanquished in a series of open controversies. A great literature embodying the true scriptural doctrines was produced, and the rejuvenated worship of Godhead was organized and provided with a considerable number of establishments in the form of the noblest shrines. The world was externally shaken by the mighty impulse, but failed to recover from its inner stupor and continued to drift aimlessly under the pilotage of professors of open and concealed atheism who quickly recovered their lead and even exploited the elaborate form of the caste organization that professes to represent the